What is the Great American Novel? Is it Moby Dick? Is it Blood Meridian? Or does it even exist? Well, today I am going to be ranking every great American novel because that's what we do here on Right Conscious. We talk about the best books and authors of all time. We talk about transformative fiction that is also entertaining, not all that fluff that you see over all across BookTube. This isn't performative. This is transformative. And so, what is the Great American Novel if we are going to go on this journey of ranking? Because today I'm not going to be ranking books like Moby Dick is a 5-star book in total, but rather I'm going to rank them on their Great American Novel-ness. How much they match the definition I am going to be laying down. And so, hands up, everybody. Let's bring it together. Is literature really dead? Well, if it is, then I'm a necromancer and I'm going to resurrect it right now. So, in 1868, John William DeForest coined the term the Great American Novel. And he said that America needed a novel to capture its entire spirit, its complexity in spirit and geographical terrain into one novel. Much like what Dickens did for England, much like what our boy Balzac did for France, Sorry, France. So Slaughterhouse-Five doesn't really bring a lot of aesthetic strength to the table, but when we think of aesthetic strength, we think of Melville, we think of Cormac McCarthy, we think of Faulkner, Pynchon, Don DeLillo, whoever. But what's interesting is that Vonnegut isn't necessarily writing in the literary giant tradition with Slaughterhouse-Five. First of all, he's writing in the sci-fi tradition, and he's writing more in the humor or black humor tradition. Plus, he's also writing in the tradition of anti-war, which is interesting because as Americans, we are so interested in that topic, I feel, because yes, over the past 50 years, we have gone on these crazy projects in the Middle East and in South America and in Eastern Europe, yada, 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 Somalia. But as Americans, we went on an entire continental colonization and war project. When you look at like the British Empire, they were dirtying their hands far away from Britain, in India or these other places. And the same goes for a lot of the other European nations. But as Americans, we had to, just a couple hundred years ago, even extending into the 1860s, 1870s, go to war against indigenous people and, throw them out basically for good. And because we are this isolated nation and because of all these world wars, there's always been a very kind of anti-war sentiment in America, especially because once the natives were conquered, we didn't really have this, it's not like Canada or Mexico is going to take us over. We didn't really have this competition. And so that's why there's such a rich tradition of poets like Robinson Jeffers and so many others who were anti-war long before Kurt Vonnegut came onto the scene. And so Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse-Five is about World War II, but he wrote this was published in 1969 when anti-war sentiment was at really an all-time high here in America. It's also somewhat innovative, and I think also taps into this kind of new American persona, one could say, because it refuses heroism. When you think about war, whether that's World War I, World War II, you think of these iconic moments. We think of Saving Private Ryan or the movie 1917 or all these kind of heroic acts, but Billy Pilgrim is the worst soldier of all time. He absolutely sucks. And so without this kind of strong character, maybe Vonnegut would tap into something else, like something cosmic, like in Moby Dick, or, maybe more of these tragic elements like you'd find in a Faulkner novel or like your typical literary novel. But instead, he flips all that on his head and nothing really bad happens to Billy Pilgrim, but instead he centers the novel around the firebombing of Dresden and America's war crimes there. And when you talk about war crimes in America, people turn up their noses because when we think of war crimes, we think of Stalin Russia and Mao and the Nazis and all these people. But, most people don't want to acknowledge what happened at My Lai or what happened at places like Dresden. And even if we were going against an immoral enemy or something like that, that doesn't exclude us or make what we did or didn't do not a war crime. Another thing that was very influential was the flat, deadpan, and ironic voice. And you can see that continue with people like Don DeLillo, Thomas Pynchon, David Foster Wallace, and even in modern culture today, when you see all these girls and they have all this flat voice and it's become an aesthetic, Kurt Vonnegut is one of the people who kind of championed that when he was looking at the machine, when you are the most powerful country in the world, the most wealthy country in the world, there are going to be dissenters. There are going to be people who look at this idea of American exceptionalism and the entrepreneurial spirit and the American housewife who has everything she needs because her husband makes enough money and they have the land, have the dog. They're going to look at all that and have an inverted response to it all. And Vonnegut and what he did in Slaughterhouse-Five was a pretty significant kind of foundation to a lot of that, which is so funny. One of my favorite things is that a lot of people don't know where their personality or their ideas come from. They think that they are just this unique creation. And I'm not saying that I am either. I can at least acknowledge where I get a lot of my presentation skills or like a lot of this stuff from. But it's interesting to see that like I'll be listening to someone talk. I'm like, dude, you're just like, dude, can't figure that out 300 years ago, but now it's just been normalized. Like, it's so funny. And the same with kind of these patterns of thought, these styles of speech. That's what's so cool about literature, is that literature is usually 10 or 20 years ahead of the curve, if not a little bit more. And then it finally gets embedded into the culture. All the ideas that people were talking about with technology in the 90s and all this in literature, these visionaries like Wallace and others, Neil Postman, all these people, it's all come to fruition today. So anyway, so in terms of my ranking, I'm not going to go on too long about each of these novels. I'm going to try to give them all their due. And because there's going to be so many, I can't just do a 30-minute lecture on each one. I'm going to throw this, and let's rank them out of 10 on the great American novelness. I'm going to throw Slaughterhouse-Five at a cool 7.1. I really don't feel like it has the ambition and the scope, but I do feel like if we're talking about this exiled visionary type thing, that's who Billy Pilgrim is. He really does embody that. And a lot of the ideas that are being talked about here have really become a part of the American persona and are the things that we are grappling with and still talking about today when we talk about if we should support other countries or if we should get involved in foreign wars. All of this, like a lot of it can tie back to Billy Pilgrim and what's going on, and especially us kind of feeling powerless in it all, feeling fragmented, us feeling like fodder for the machine, like all this stuff. So even though it doesn't have the aesthetic strength, I still feel like this is a really important novel, especially for young people, like to realize their identity as Americans. I feel like a lot of my students that got it, like, 80% of the class is just reading it because they have to, but there are a couple kids every class that are like, I can see it working on their brain and being like, wow, this is like resonating with me. And so boom, there we go. Moving on to our next novel. And that novel, of course, is Moby Dick, everyone. I am so pumped up that I switched out of my Ted Kaczynski shirt and put on the Lee Harvey Oswald shirt. Let's go, America. So Moby Dick, what can I say? This is the great American novel, everybody. Spoiler alert. I just reread this for the Right Conscious Book Club, and I am shook every time I read this. I got fired from Rock Security in Las Vegas because I continued to read this while at work, and they kept saying to me, put that away, we're going to fire you. And I said, I don't care. And I got fired. That's how good this book is. It's good even outside of the great American novelness ranking also. This novel is the greatest American spiritual literary project ever commenced. There are novels in the future that are more ambitious. One could say have better prose, do better. But for the time, for the scope, nothing was more ambitious, nothing was more transformative, and nothing was more spiritual. Because this is the Gnostic underbelly of America. This is the American religion. This isn't some simple, I don't want to say simple. This isn't some easy to digest Protestant or Catholic theology. This is the turbid waters described in the Nag Hammadi library, even though Melville didn't even have that yet. This is Schelling's and Fichte's and the German idealist dark unconscious in a book. Melville got out of the landlocked cities and frontier and took us as Americans to the sea, somewhere we weren't really familiar with yet. Came here on boats, but we didn't have these vast empires yet that were driven by the sea. This is the American Bible. I would go as far to say that this went as far to redefining and reshaping America and how we conceptualized ourselves as the Old Testament did for Israel. Try that on for size. So if you want to talk about this with me, the Right Conscious Book Club is talking about this Saturday. The Right Conscious Book Club, if you do not know, is the most active book club in the world. We read 50 to 70 books a year. That means 5 to 7 novels every single month. Yes, you heard that here first. Every other book club that you could find on BookTube or online reads like 1 a month, maybe 2. We expand to 6, 7, sometimes even 10 novels. I had to pull myself back. My wife had to drag me by my collar because at one point we were reading 20 novels at once. All I did that month during the summer when I had a break was read. I was reading like 10 hours a day. We are a serious club. We are a club where you will get to talk. If you show up on Saturday to the book club, you will talk about Moby Dick. If you love it, even you don't have time to reread it by then, most likely, unless you're a reading god, you will talk about this book for 10 minutes. Each person that shows up, guaranteed. We aren't going to be bringing the Ishmael energy to the book club. We are going to be bringing the Ahab energy to the book club. But if you join my book club, you are not just supporting me, you are supporting the literary renaissance, and you are also going to get access to hundreds of hours of content just like this. I have literature courses, I have writing courses, I have book breakdowns, I do deep dives into everything. I'm relaunching my free writing school over there. I have my own writing over there. I have free content over there. I host live streams over there instead of on YouTube. Everything that I do that is important and everything that all the greatest writers in the world are doing right now is on Substack. And so I encourage you guys to go over there and support me if you guys have the means to do so, because I'm trying to take this full time. I'm trying to sail with a ship of fools out on the turbid waters to kick off a literary renaissance. And when you support me, you are also supporting everyone else who I'm going to activate in the future so that we can create a literary renaissance. Let's talk about the book. The link is down below. So Melville realized when he wrote this novel that the sea is basically geographically the same, right? Like there's obviously waves and problems and storms and standstills and all of this. But on the sea, he could connect to the spiritual. He could dive in to epistemology. This novel is a meditation on what can we actually know. This novel dives into myths. Ahab is giving sermons. There are endless catalogs of what's on the whaling ship. There's a ton of philosophy in here. It really pushes the idea of what can we really know in the internal. Throughout this entire novel, Melville is trying to move beyond language. He's not being like Wittgenstein. He's being like Charles Sanders Peirce, who is a better thinker on language, who's also one of the greatest American philosophers of all time. Do you guys know about Peirce? If you have not read Peirce, I was reading Cormac McCarthy and I was like, oh my God. I was actually talking to someone and they're like, dude, I know that McCarthy read Peirce. And I was like, how can we prove that though? And then a photo was released with McCarthy holding the collected works of him when asked to take a photo with the book. That's who he chose. That's how good this guy is. That's the level that Melville is on. He is moving beyond language. He is trying to connect us to the Weaver God, the true American God, which isn't this God from Israel, but something that is much more advanced and much more complicated. And I know that's going to ruffle some feathers out there, but that is the truth. Melville brings to life what McCarthy tries to also in Blood Meridian, what McCarthy calls the optical democracy, because everything in this novel is metaphysical. Everything matters in the quest for the white whale. Moby Dick is so good that it is a modernist novel and a postmodernist novel all at once. There is a fragmented narrative. There's a whole crew of odd characters. There's self-commentary that never ends. There's a collapse or an integration of the scientific and the sacred. It never ends. Harold Bloom saw this and saw Melville as the inheritor of Shakespeare's lineage. Try that on for size, everybody. I'm going to just keep saying the same cliches over and over again. Let's go. There's so much variety of style in this novel that it's mind-blowing. Like, it just was endless. I just was like, oh, he's doing this now. He's doing this now. Melville was possessed when he does this, when he wrote this. And later on, we're going to talk about the Scarlet Letter and how it inspired this. And let's talk about some villains now. Goodbye, Mr. Peirce. Captain Ahab is one of the greatest villains in literature of all time. And tomorrow I'm going to hopefully release a video on the best villains in literature. So if you're seeing this later, go check that out. That's going to be one of my most fire videos of all time. The whale wounded Ahab. the ultimate wound. This is like Hemingway on fire. And that wound, that pain, that suffering becomes his entire being. Ahab is on this mission to go beyond the world of the physical to the spiritual world. And that is the American ideology. What do you think we're doing out here in all these wars, everybody? We think that truth lies behind dropping an atom bomb for no reason. And yes, everyone, we did not need to drop the atom bomb. Get in the comments right now and say, we had to save lives. We would have won the war. Japan would have given up. That is a piece of propaganda. That's one of the greatest pieces of propaganda. We love to try to find some truth after some destruction, everybody. And all the endless wars that I was just talking about. Ahab does not worship God in this novel. He worships that God is no longer there, which is such a power move by Melville. He embodies this the confidence of Satan, and he brings to the table this American individualism, this American self-reliance. There's only one person in all of literature who's as wild as him, and who is that? And that's King Lear. Ahab is the ultimate madman, and we get more of him in this than we necessarily get of Lear. Everybody was influenced by this. There's not one American writer that is good that isn't writing in the system of Moby Dick. You can't say that about any other American novel. No one leapt like this out of anyone we're going to talk about in terms of form. Actually, I would say almost in the history of literature, maybe outside of Shakespeare, but Shakespeare just kind of stole from Chaucer. Integrating this into a novel this big, all this stuff is insane. I could go on and on about the symbolism of this novel, but I'm not spoiling stuff in this video. I'm going to keep it straight for all of you guys so that you guys are motivated to read this. If you have not read Moby Dick, go buy Moby Dick. This is, and here is my final ranking. There is nothing in this video that's going to beat it, but there are going to be ones that are very, very close. This is a 10 out of a 10, no questions asked. If you don't believe that, then you have it wrong. There, in terms of the bucket of quality, there is no way that you can toss Moby Dick down. That's how confident I am in saying that. If you are, then there's something wrong with you, because everyone else knows it's good. And you could be the contrarian. Oh my God. But have fun being that, because we're going to be riding the waves, everybody. Let's go. So let's spark the controversy even more. Next up, we have Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And Nabokov was an immigrant to the United States, but immigration has been a part of our history forever. None of us are, unless you are indigenous to America, you immigrated here at some point. And this novel is about America. But the problem isn't in that Nabokov doesn't understand America because he was an immigrant. I think that if you're an immigrant, then you can come here and you can really tap into the American spirit and what it means. But I think what happened, the problem with Nabokov was that he was from the aristocracy in Russia, and he never let that go. He was very much tied to the aristocracy. If you read his autobiography, Speak Memory, when he talks about the Russian Revolution, he makes it seem like the Bolsheviks had no reason to to overthrow the government, that everything was fine, as everyone in the aristocracy thinks. Like, he has a very, but he also knew, obviously, so many people that died and saw what happened and, saw his country get ruined. But nonetheless, he doesn't have this democratic voice. He doesn't have this Melvillian, this Whitmanian, this even Pinchonian type voice that really is for the people. And you can see that because Lolita is a novel of observation and not confession. When you look at Moby Dick, Call Me Ishmael, See the Child, when you read a lot of these great American novels, about Billy Pilgrim, that it is a confession about what happened. It isn't this more observational tone. And I think that that's what really holds this back from kind of stepping into this space of being one of these really influential American novels. Because if we're talking about these novels that took America to the next level, I don't think Lolita really did that in the American sense. I think that Lolita changed all of literature on a global level forever. And many people have never read Lolita. People think that Lolita is just about the weird stuff, but it's actually really never explicitly mentioned. Lolita is a frame novel that really explores our obsession with power, our obsession with the artist, our obsession with psychoanalysis and all this other stuff and the smoke and mirrors surrounding it all. And part of that does tap into America. Part of that does tap into our cultural infatuation here with youth, with novelty, with growth, with beauty, all while pretending to be these virtuous people. We're a small town culture. Here we are. We're Americans, all of this. And so Lolita really does see through the fantasy of post-war America. It talks about these seedy motels. It literally talks about advertising. It has many references to, they're on the American highways. They're in jukeboxes. There's so many cliches in here that really are kind of trying to tear down the American vision. And Nabokov is really kind of pointing at America, much like what Jean Baudrillard did in his sociological expose, America, that America is just a civilization of simulacra. It's all just on the surface, that really beneath all this, we aren't really anything. And I think that kind of ironic tone really isn't taking into account what an American truly is and isn't really tapping into that spiritual nature. I feel like there are a lot of people who like to take this perspective and like to tear things down, but here on Right Conscious, I don't believe in the deconstructor and destroyers. One of the worst things that has happened to us is commenting culture online, that it's really easy to tear something down. You guys could look at what I just said and easily tear it down. You guys could look at my channel and figure out everything that I'm doing wrong. But we have a culture of throwing people down now, but not building people up. I'm not saying you need to build me up, but we have no more heroes. We have no more presence because we are so interested in this culture of destruction. And speaking of which, that really started to happen with a lot of, and I'm not one of these like, oh, the postmodernists are evil, but a lot of the ideas that the postmodernists like Foucault, Derrida, Paul de Man, who were geniuses in their own right, a lot of that stuff was taken then, in the 90s and early 2000s and even up to today, and really turned against the culture, and there was no response of how we were going to rebuild it. And that's a whole other conversation. But Lolita and many postmodernist works, one could throw Blood Meridian into this category of, being an anti-Western, tearing down our conceptualization of the West. It's not really their job to, rebuild things from the ashes. It's our job, but we've now, us as citizens are not rebuilding what the artists have torn down, and instead are participating in the process. We are all, artists and deconstructors now. And so I feel like if you really want to write the great American novel, you have to at least have experienced the dream. I feel like you had to have at least believed in it or let it touch your soul a little bit. And I think that Nabokov, by the time he got here, never really believed in, I'm not talking about like the American dream of like, a white picket fence or something like that, just the American spirit. And so it's useful because of that. We can see ourselves outside of ourselves in that. But I think that makes it a little bit harder for me to put high on this list. So I'm going to give it a 5.9 on its American novelness. And if you haven't read it, it's a really genius novel in terms of like if you're a writer or if you're really interesting about like framings and unreliable narration and all of this stuff. Really, really, Nabokov is a genius, man. Pin, Speak Memory. A lot of his work. Pale Fire, so good. And one last note, just these ideas. You can point out America is an illusion, but if you want me to believe you, if you can't do it, like I said, in this aristocratic way, like, oh, yeah, dumb people, like when people do that to you, like, oh, phones are so dumb. When people do that, we just are like, ugh. Like that's what I get with Nabokov. Baudrillard did a little bit better with his book because he traveled through America. He like really thought about it and like wasn't very as despairing about it. But I digress. And so next we have A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. And if you guys have not read this one yet, this one is so fun, man. Toole characterized with Ignatius Reilly, the lit bro, the annoying lit bro. And it's a really cool novel. I just knew someone who read this, who I consider very smart, and they gave it a 10 out of 10. So there you go. So this novel is somewhat of a gag and somewhat of a critique of American individualism, which is, one of our greatest strengths and one of our greatest weaknesses. And Ignatius Reilly, who is the main protagonist of this story, is living in New Orleans. He's got like a master's degree in medieval history. He's living with his mom. He's unemployed, and he's just almost insufferable at times because he thinks that everyone else is just an idiot. He just is like pure 4chan. Like if you guys just go to 4chan right now and see what see what they are up to over there, and it's like Ignatius Riley incarnated. And so in terms of aesthetic writing and style, A Confederacy of Dunces didn't change the game at all. It's not really on that level. But in terms of kind of that absurd category that I was talking about, really that kind of, Slaughterhouse-Five, kind of this humorous category, it is a pretty strong contender in that, especially for a Southern absurd novel, which is kind of more of a regional thing. It is one of the strongest kind of great American novels. It almost feels like this is in like the lineage of like a Whitman. Remember when Whitman said, I contain multitudes. When you look at this because this novel, because it takes place in New Orleans, has all types of people, all types of crazy people, weird people, business people. It's just like everybody's in this novel. It's kind of like it's a slapstick novel also. And it's really just kind of showing America, New Orleans, the South, for what it is. But I think that Ignatius Riley and what Toole is kind of pushing for is more of a symptom of the modern world, no matter where you are at, or I should say kind of the Western world, and really not as much tapping into the American spirit, even though it is. And so even though I love this novel, and this is going to be the case for some of these lower ranked ones, I'm going to throw this at like a 5.4 on the Great American Novel scale. And that's also partly because this is a posthumous novel. I think that if Toole got some momentum and kept writing a couple more novels with what I was seeing here for a first novel, he could have been a really great and influential figure, and one of these people that was still alive today with an entire bibliography of stuff, but he unfortunately took his own life. And so moving on. So next up we have American Pastoral by Philip Roth. And I'm only going to pick one book per author. And it's going to be the book from their bibliography that I feel like embodies the most great American novelness. And so Roth is a part of this group of American authors, which include DeLillo, McCarthy, and Pynchon, that were born in the 1930s. And they were an absolute force in American fiction. And a quick hot take, I believe that a lot of young writers or writers out there on Substack, and I'm out there on Substack reading people's stuff every single day. I've been a part of the writing scene forever. And I see that a lot of young writers try to kind of imitate or walk in the lineage of Cormac McCarthy, DeLillo, or Pynchon more. But I feel like a lot more people, and I think the majority of people, if I was going to choose one, just depending on how these people are already writing, they would get a lot more from imitating and following in the footsteps of Philip Roth. And so American Pastoral is really interesting because it is small in focus. So American Pastoral is a frame novel, and I'm not going to spoil anything in this video that you couldn't read on like the back book cover or on an Amazon description. But this is a frame novel of a man named Nathan, who's actually Philip Roth, going to this high school reunion, and he starts talking to this guy whose brother was the king of the school, the football player, the guy who went and got rich after high school, married the girl, and this guy's telling him about his tragic turn of events. And so we kind of get this framing of a story, and this novel is very ambitious, but it's small in scope. It's just focusing on one guy and his family and nothing really else. But Stephen King called this one of his top 5 novels of all time, like his top 5 favorites. And so even though this has a very small scope, Roth shows what you can do in terms of ambition with that small of a scope. And in a second, we're going to talk about 2 novels that are being propped up as the great American novel that also have a small narrative scope, but don't bring any ambition to the table. And so I feel like we are in a standstill of sorts, which indicates to me that this novel was really important, and it is in this great American novel category in the sense that I don't feel like we've moved on from Roth's lineage yet. I feel like Volman, especially with his new Million World novel, A Table of Fortune, which is coming out this March, has actually moved Thomas Pynchon's legacy forward. I feel like David Foster Wallace, Daniel Lusky, even Jonathan Franzen, Wittgenstein's Mistress, all these books have actually taken what like Gravity's Rainbow did and moved it forward. Maybe they weren't as good or something like that, but I feel like Pynchon's legacy has evolved not because of him. I also feel the same way about DeLillo. A lot of the authors who I just named also were working in DeLillo's kind of world, but I feel like Cormac McCarthy's and Philip Roth's legacy haven't exactly been kicked down the road yet, haven't really had these authors who've embodied what they were doing. And it's not like they need to imitate them, but in that kind of space and taking it to the next level. And I feel like it's because it's really hard. So American Pastoral is this American tragedy novel, but it shows a lot of restraint. It isn't just crying and all this stuff, but rather we're kind of getting this unreliable frame narration from this guy's point of view that's just totally screwed up, and you just want to grab him and be like, dude, for the love of God, do something right. You're missing everything. Everything has gone wrong. And as the novel unfolds, it just gets really dark really fast. And it becomes like everyone's worst nightmare. But the way that it's being framed, the way that it's being written, doesn't make it seem like that. But as you're sitting there thinking about it, you're like, damn, this is actually like really bad. But that's what happens all across the country, bro. People reduce what's actually happening in their family through we justify these things. And, anyway, we'll talk about more books and I'll like circle back to this one. This is why I kind of put it at the front here. But I think that ability is really, really important because us as Americans who are isolated in these suburban, communities and don't talk to each other, we've lost our neighborly instincts, all this stuff. I feel like it plays into all this, not just in like, hey, Jim, but also in our own soul, that we're alone in our own soul and that we're like wading through this unreliable world a lot of the time. And American Pastoral really captures that. And there's a lot of other Roth novels that are really good that I could have put on here. But I feel like this one, if you're going to do something like read one, this is a really good place to start. And like I said, it's very ambitious. So I'm going to give this about a 7.5 on my 7.6 on my Great American Novelist list. I think that the lack of epicness, the lack of scope does hurt it, but this is about as far as I think that you can max out, especially for a contemporary American novel that's small and focused on a family, especially without any like higher elements in it. In a second, we're going to talk about a small scope novel that works, that has more higher elements in it. And that novel is Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. And this one is really good, in my opinion. This is a sneaker dark horse pick for the Great American Novel. And if you haven't read Robinson before, you 100% should. She is one of the best living novelists out there by far. So what makes this work in one of its biggest strengths is that it tackles a category that's really important for us in America, especially right now. Because when you look at Faulkner, for instance, he really focuses on time and the evolution and de-evolution of the South, and his narratives are almost haunted by slavery and Reconstruction and life before all that. Like it's always really good stuff. The same could be said about like Toni Morrison's work. Same could be said that Melville has this commentary on the cosmos, and we could point to all these different figures and like all these different authors we're going to be talking about today and say, yes, that's what they were talking about. And I feel like that is one of the hidden criterias of a really good Great American Novel, is that it's making a commentary on something. But what this novel accomplishes is that it makes the modern Protestant voice poetic, because when you think about Thoreau and Emerson and Edwards and their Protestant voice, that almost faded away in America. We've had a decline in great Christian writers here in America. As I've talked about before, I think that it's harder and harder to be a great Christian writer because you have to learn to work within constraints. And when you watch someone like Robinson go to work, she knows exactly how to do that, and use that to her advantage. As maybe some of your other contemporaries not only can use Christianity and invert it and have no qualms in doing so, but they can explore everything else and feel like it's not violating anything at all. And so being a Christian author is almost, anyway, we don't have to get into that, but Robinson is probably the greatest living Christian novelist, maybe outside of like a Wendell Berry right now, in my opinion. If you guys are interested in that, I have a top 10 Christian novelist list if you guys want to go check that out. But this novel isn't religious propaganda. Like, here I am talking about, oh, it's a Christian novel and all this. It really isn't that. It's a novel that's ruminating on this, on faith in the modern world and what it really means. And it doesn't really need to be applied to like Christianity, but just our faith toward any goodness in the world, our faith in higher ideals in the deconstruct and destroy cultural wasteland we are in right now. And so I first read this back in university, and my professor framed it as the anti-Great Gatsby because this takes place in the Midwest. It is a haunting novel. There's some subversive elements to the Great Gatsby. You kind of see beneath the hood a little bit, but in the Midwest, and especially when this is taking place, we have the empty porches, we have the commercialization of farms, things dying out. It's not a nostalgic novel. It's a novel kind of about death and dying, and about staying strong through all that, though, and remaining humble enduring. And like, I absolutely love that, because that's what kind of being an American is about. We love these grand American exceptionalism stories, but at the end of the day, a lot of America are these rural individuals who are Protestants. Maybe they're Catholics, and we disregard them. We think that because they're not these innovators, they're not these shakers, they are just, people that go to work and, yada, 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 and aren't reading, maybe aren't on Reddit, not these overthinkers who went to college, that they are invalid, that they are a bunch of idiots who just voted for Trump or something like that. That's how they're treated. And so many of the books we're going to talk about today also are these tragedies. They're violent. They're dealing with the cosmos, or they're dealing with this crazy black humor. This novel isn't that. This novel is about an interior revelation, and how an interior revelation coming from a Protestant point of view. And here I am coming with all my Eastern philosophy and my crazy other stuff, and I see the weight of this. I see like, wow, this is really strong, because a revelation, when you say that word, I don't care who's having a revelation. If you're having a true revelation, then I am here to listen to you. And I can see through some of the things maybe you're saying that I don't believe in, but that's so important. That's something that we're missing in this world. We almost have no revelation anymore. CoffeeZilla made sure to, look at this, Mind Shift, the YouTube channel or whatever, revelation is a tool of control. But this novel continues our spiritual experiment. It continues what we really set out to do here in America. We have a crazy history of religion here, and a lot of that has been muted. A lot of that has been turned into the Mick churches out there, the Mick temples, in the Mormons' case, just commercializing all of it, big bands playing, like not actually feeling it, or just crazy, insane stuff. So anyway, I really like Marilynne Robinson. She's a great author. I would recommend this one. I'd recommend Housekeeping. So I'm going to throw this up at a 8.1 on my list of the great American novel. So next we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. If you haven't read this one yet, this is a really awesome novel. This one's a wild novel. This is an ambitious novel. Morrison is really good. There's been a lot of talk lately about Percival Everett's 2024 novel, James, being the next great American novel, and it is absolutely not. It's just a talking point, for people like Jack Edwards and Kamala Harris to say and giggle about. And James is just a Huck Finn fan fiction, and it's good. It's a revenge novel that Percival Everett knows how to write entertaining novels that also have literary and transformative elements. I've read Erasure, I've read The Trees, I've read James, I've read American Desert, which I liked. There aren't many novels about the desert. And anyway, don't get me going on that. There are good novels, but I never really feel like Percival broke into the great category. And that's partially because James is limited in its scope. It is talking about a story that's already been talked about and has almost no ambitious stylistic or literary elements to help it break free of Huck Finn. And just because you retell a story and flip it on its head doesn't mean that it's the great American novel. Just a quick FYI. And it could be, it's not just there are plenty of novels about slavery or dealing with slavery that can easily do it, but you have to have some ambition in there. Octavia Butler said, how can I make this, how can I go crazier? Let's add some time travel in here. Like, let's get crazy with it. And the same is true with Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison in Beloved. Morrison is a very strong literary and stylistic author. She is ambitious. She knows how to write. She knows how to make you feel. She knows how to kill. She knows how to just throw it down and get crazy with it and make you connected and blow your mind. And she also isn't afraid to bring in the supernatural. She isn't afraid to bring in the Southern Gothic. I've talked about this book multiple times. I've talked about the Song of Solomon. I've talked about Sulla. It's actually not up there right now, or Sula, whatever it is. All good novels, great novels, I would say. And I feel like Beloved belongs in the conversation of the great American novel because it gives slavery symbolic weight. It gives slavery this mythic weight because it detaches itself partially from slavery. It takes this modern 90s literary fiction voice, this power, I could throw Morrison in that group with Roth and all the DeLillo and all those people. There's this very strong modern contemporary strength and ambition in the writing. There's realistic elements to it, like what's happening with slavery and what happens when you escape from slavery and all this tension there. But then there's mythology added. There's supernatural elements added. And it's not crazy. And we don't really know what's real and not real. This isn't a genre fiction novel. And there's this oral storytelling element added to it all because it's somewhat hard when characters are, if you have a novel, and there have been, many novels that I've read, and you're dealing with people who are in slavery, then kind of the goal a lot of the time is to one, just, survive for one and try to make your life something. And then obviously to escape. And so that's the big kind of tension there. But what happens when you do escape and you're living on the border of a slave state and there's all this tension going on? Well, that's what Beloved is. What happens when the trauma from the past and the things that you had to do, which I won't spoil, which is so good, you guys. This novel will make you be like, oh my God. Like, what happens when all that comes back to haunt you? And that's what this novel is about. That's what this novel accomplishes. This novel deals with moral questions. It makes me want to cry, you guys. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, it deals with moral questions at a really high level, which I think is important. And I think when we talk about, like, these questions involving slavery, like I said, we have this whole field of literature dealing with what actually was happening there, which is fine. But what do you have to give to get out of it? What are the, and that's what this novel really explores. And it gives the characters and the scene, the space to be able to kind of build that up. And Morrison just kind of knows how to do it, man. It's great, man. Like, I could throw this against, you could throw this in the pool with everybody. So I'm gonna throw this up here at a 9.0. There you guys go, a 9.0. All right, moving on. So next we have The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, also a good novel, and if not a great novel. And I am maybe a bit too particular about this one because I had to read it twice for a class. Take these college classes, you read a book once, and like, I'm a huge fan of rereading, but this wasn't my favorite novel not because it doesn't have vision. I mean, if I had to give this a ranking, like, the vision, the scope, what it's trying to accomplish, especially in the first third of the novel, I feel like we're getting up there in that, high 9s category out of 10. Like, it really does have that. It really did revolutionize the American consciousness in writing. So it's knocked on a lot of those boxes. But I can also say the style is really good. The prose of this time, like, he's like writing like Faulkner at the time in terms of musicality and like flow and rhythm. You read it and you're like, damn, Ellison's cooking. But I feel like the second 2/3 of the novel, the stuff dealing with the riots and all that, I feel like the cohesion and the structure of the novel somewhat falls away. And it always, as I'm reading this, always feels like a slog. This may be just a personal opinion, but I knew a lot of people who I was reading this with in person and they had similar thoughts. And so this novel is about breaking free from ideology. It's one mind. But like Beloved, for instance, that offered me an entire world. Moby Dick, Blood Meridian, some of these other novels, they offer me a world to explore, to be in. And like I said, that's not a requirement to be a great novel, but we're doing a great American novel ranking list. And so kind of identifying this American experience and this kind of ideal that I'm looking for, I feel like the political and all the allegorical stuff in this novel just don't really accomplish what it needs to accomplish. That could just be a thing that, has changed over time. Maybe I don't, I feel like I know a decent amount about the time and what was happening and what this novel is about. But this novel never circles back to society, never really circles back to America. And so because of that, I'm going to give it a 7.3 on our Great American Novel scale. So next we have Revolutionary Road, which was obviously adapted with DiCaprio and Winslet. I'm going to throw this one at, I'll call it a 6.0. I just made a list and I'm just going to try to get through as many as I can. And so I feel like this doesn't have very much stylistic originality. It does have an influence in the world of realism with people like Updike and Carver. It does have a decent amount of psychological depth, but just kind of focusing on the destruction of the American suburbia and all the problems that happen within that, I just don't think is enough, to pull into this category. So actually, I'm going to put it a little bit lower. I think that it's really more like a 5.2 on the list, but I just wanted to mention this. It's a good read. It's a hard read. It's kind of like a, oh my God read. The movie's pretty good too. If you haven't checked out Revolutionary Road, it's a really good, if you're living in suburbia and you're married, this is like everything that can go wrong. I remember I avoided reading this because I had just gone into when I heard about my first long-term relationship in life and was like, it wasn't going good. That's why I'm not with her anymore. And I was kind of like, I don't really want to read this one. So I read it after we broke up and I was like, yeah, thank God this is where all that was headed. Not that I was like the dude in the story. Anyway, moving on. So next we have The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And I remember first reading this in high school and being like, what? Funny story. So I started a Goodreads account all the way back in 2008 when I was in high school. And I started writing reviews over there, which is funny because I never go to Goodreads anymore, barely. And It really did help me out back in the day, though. Like, I didn't really look at their rankings. I would find people who I thought like looked really smart or like had crazy reviews. And I would like look at what they rated 5 stars and then read that. That was actually some really good early recommendations. Funny enough, though, I had a review for the Communist Manifesto, which I first read in 8th grade. And then when I was like in 9th grade, if I remember correctly, I wrote this review. And back then I was like lit bro, atheist, communist. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be religious anymore. And so I gave it a 5 stars and I wrote this review on it. And then as the years went on, it became the top review because it was just like a right conscious polemic. I was like, workers unite, fuck everyone. But like when I was like 17, I was like, I'm not a communist anymore. Like, what am I doing here? Like, this is dumb. I actually started to look into it more, and my dad was a professor at UNLV with Murray Rothbard and Hans Hermann Hoppe, and he did his graduate work under them. And then when I realized that, like, my dad's like, yeah, I worked with and still work with these super famous anarchist professors. And I started reading their works and I was like, oh my God. And then, I was all over the place for a really long time in terms of economics. But eventually I deleted that original account because I wrote hundreds of reviews back in the day. That's probably where all this started. Anyway, I remember reading this though and being like, communism, like I'm right. I'm reading about the factories and all this stuff, and I didn't even think about the factories in Russia. I was like, America's terrible. Look at us. I was definitely on the wrong track. I wasn't really looking at like the military industrial complex and like the Iraq war and everything yet. We hadn't really broken through very far in that realm of consciousness. I think I did when I was like maybe like 16, started listening to like rappers that were just like calling George Bush a fucking clown. I was like, oh my God. But this novel, I reread it with one of my classes. I liked it, but I reread it. And I was like, this actually isn't that good of a novel. It's brutal, but in terms of its mythic weight, it's more of a realist novel, obviously. There's no inwardness with the characters. There's no real style to be said. Obviously, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of tragedy. It was influential. It did help pass the Pure Food and Drug Act. And, if you look at how the FDA regulates today, they don't look at the food pyramid, look at what they say is healthy for us. They're still being paid off by all these food corporations and stuff. And so this doesn't really have any influence, even though I see it get talked about on these lists. So I'm going to throw it down there at a 3.0. So next we have the Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. My grandpa, shout out to him. He's now dead. He first got me into this. You want to. So my dad's side of the family is all from Canada. My dad is a Canadian immigrant, and because he went to school here, then became a professor here, yada yada yada. And so shout out Markham, Ontario. Let's go, everyone. And so I only got to see them maybe like once a year. And my grandfather was a big reader, and it's kind of hard to figure out what to talk about him with. He was like pretty old because he had my dad when he was like 35 or 36 or something, and I think my parents had me when they were like 34 or something. And so anyway, I started reading like war novels and stuff, all this stuff, because he was in World War II. And shout out to him, man. It's really important to be a family of readers. Like everyone in my family reads. My sister, mom, dad, all my Canadian family, they read. Like, it really does make a big deal in culture and like influence, because I'd be thinking like, oh, I want to impress my grandpa. I want to be able to talk to him about things. I just don't want him to, have to talk to me about like dumb stuff. Like, he doesn't know about video games. Like, he doesn't know about the PS1. He doesn't know about Medal of Honor. Everybody, let's go. So the Red Badge of Courage is one of the best Civil War. Okay, I'm not gonna call it the best Civil War novel because it's not, but it's a really good Civil War novel. That actually belongs to the Killer Angels. Anybody ever read the Killer Angels out there? Anybody ever read Shiloh by Shelby Foote, excuse me. Anyway, don't even get into all that. But in terms of influence in great American novel, I mean, the Civil War is one of these things that we don't really get a lot of content on anymore, unfortunately. It's one of these polarized topics that you can't really explore as much as you should be able to. Because speaking about the fracturing of the American spirit, we haven't been able to even figure out how we feel about all that. And anyway, that tension and confusion made William Faulkner's career also. Absalom is all about that. Anyway, we'll be talking about that in a second. Point being that we need to have more Civil War movies, like that Gettysburg movie, phenomenal. We need to have more books on the Civil War. We need to just have more conversations and art thinking about it, because it's really important. And so I'm going to throw this in here at about a 6.5, because the novel stops before really like any inquiry into the this existential crisis of war. You know, people like Hemingway, Faulkner, McCarthy, and plenty of others cross that line, and Crane from a technical level was very strong. You know, I remember Hemingway saying something like he was born, you know, a couple decades too early. Like, this guy was so good that if he got to like really be in a different era where he was able to actually explore this stuff because it had been explored, if he didn't have to be the genius figuring it all out and being the first person to do it and go all the way, if he had seen it get done, he would have been able to do it. Because when you look at the impressionistic style in this, it's really good. Crane is a really good writer, but it falls short because it's not in spirit. You know, it's a really good technical novel, but its spirit really didn't change American life like some of the in our conception of being an American, like some of these other novels did. And so, you know, love this novel. There you guys go. Moving on. Next, we have Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. I had a professor obsessed with this dude, man. We read him in every one of her classes, no matter, she just figured out how to fit it in. She had a class on modernism. Oh, he was really a naturalist. Well, we're going to throw him in here. He was during the time period. Anyway, so to me, Dreiser almost feels like an American Dickens, but his style is much flatter. Like, he really isn't a very fun person to read. There's little to no revelation in a lot of his texts. There's no jumping. There's nothing really epic about them. But he was one of the first American authors to really explore things like ambition and what happens to morality when you're chasing money, exploring sex, all these different things, all these really social things in a pretty detached way. And so that was, you know, actually pretty influential. When you look at what he did, there would be no Steinbeck, no Sinclair Lewis, and so many other of these modernist people without what Dreiser did. But I really don't feel like he really changed the entire landscape. I mean, he somewhat did. He just kind of gave everyone permission to explore these themes and this kind of American new morality in the age of the city and, you know, the big city and all this stuff. But I'm going to put this one and, you know, most of his works really down here for Great American Novels about a 5.9, which may ruffle some feathers for all the people who love him. Absolutely love him. But in terms of scope, bro, you could look all across the world at people who were doing this around the time that he was doing it. He was just doing it in an American context really well, but I really don't feel like captured America. Speaking of that professor in naturalism, I would give this around the same score to Frank Norris's McTeague. If you want to learn about naturalism, that whole line, I feel like it's very underrepresented here on BookTube. I don't feel like people talk about Norris and Dreiser very much, and they should. Like I said, it's not the most explosive reading. It's not Tolstoy and, like, you know, some of that stuff that was coming out around a similar time, or Dostoevsky or whoever. But it's a part of the canon, but I just don't feel like it. It feels like a slog at time. It was, you know, these are the things you read at university. But I don't feel like the whole naturalist movement, including Jack London, and a novel like Martin Eden, I don't feel like he really took things to the next level either. Kind of an odd group of people, like when you study American naturalism, like definitely overrated. Like, I need to make a video on American literary movements and like how good they were. And like, as when I was a high school teacher, I had to like talk about this stuff all the time and go through the slideshow. And this is what these people thought and yada, yada, yada. And the more I read, like, it sounds really cool, like the naturalists, and like you read like some of the, like To Build a Fire, and you read White Fang and all this stuff. But like, there really isn't there like that much depth there. And it's kind of an annoying point of view in actuality. Like I said, when you look at Russia and Europe and like what they were doing, or even if you look at like Whitman and Thoreau and all this other stuff, it's kind of like, I don't really care about you guys. And like, this is just kind of silly. And I think it's also proven that people like Sinclair Lewis and others that were, John Updike and others that were inspired by him, really aren't that good, in my opinion. Really, like, we're talking for the Great American Novel, they don't really bring any weight to the table. And it's funny because when you look at people who are inspired by Updike, I'm not going to say any names, who are semi-popular writers right now, I don't feel like they're very good either, man. They're usually just like, get me out of here, man. Maybe it's just because I'm wearing the camo and I got Lee Harvey Oswald on my shirt, but it's just not that good. So next up, we have The Great Gatsby. And What's so funny about this novel is I had to read it so many times as a teacher. And I remember one time I had this professor who I really respect. He's now published multiple books with Big Five publishers, and he was my creative writing professor for one semester. And I remember some kid, he was trying to talk to some kid who was trying to like get into an MFA program, and they were talking after class, and he was like, okay, well, what's your favorite writer? Like, let me help you. Like, what's your favorite book? And the guy was like, The Great Gatsby. And he's like, what? No, really? He's like, The Great Gatsby. He's like, what? And I saw this look on his face like, oh my God, this guy's not going to get into a program. He's fucked. And it was right. The guy applied like 30 places and didn't get in anywhere. And it's like, it's true. What you read kind of is like what you do. And, another funny story about this is that, the reason I hate talking about The Great Gatsby and like Frankenstein and George Orwell is that everyone has read them. Everyone has read all the Spark Notes and answers online. Everyone has wrote an essay on it. Everybody has heard these cliche same opinions over and over and over again. And so when I would teach it, I would say like these crazy things, like for about like the green light. Like I want to be like, it's a desire and illusion. That's what you're supposed to say. It's the American dream. It's all this stuff, right? But I would like say the wildest stuff. I would be talking about like, it's his mommy issues exemplified. It's the unification of the color spectrum. And then even funnier, I would make them make posters and I'd hang them out on the wall, and I would, and because they knew I was grading them, they'd be using my theories. And then, the other snooty teachers would be walking around the hall. I remember them like looking like, what? The green light doesn't mean that. It's so funny, but it's so annoying to me because it's really about creative interpretation. I had this student, he's still at school right now. And now I know this, but apparently he's that kid. I mean, you could tell that he's just taking a ton of mushrooms and acid all the time and always baked in class. And when I would, ask one of these questions, what does this mean? He would raise his hand and come up with a great answer. Maybe not a perfect answer, but everyone would laugh at him. But he had these creative interpretations, and he'd have these great essays and these great ideas because he was willing to be wrong. He was willing to really push himself. And that's kind of one of the problems with like literature culture is like the right answer and trying to figure it all out and all this stuff. Summarization, like it's silly because most people stop at high school. Like when you get to university, like I would write these crazy essays like Frankenstein is a Derridian explanation of Schelling's natural philosophy with the sprinkle of Hegel. And it's, I would just go on these crazy rants and the professor's like, oh my God, that's a great idea, Ian. But it really helped me kind of get going with making up my own theories and thinking about it all. Anyway, so The Great Gatsby, though, where are we putting it on the list? I feel like the language and the style in this novel, Fitzgerald is a clean writer. Even though it's not my personal favorite style, I could see its immense weight. I can see what he did, and having read it many times, it's very perfect for what it was trying to do. I feel like it obviously tackles the idea of the American dream really well, which is kind of one of these really big themes and archetypes. And I'm resisting going crazy on this novel. Like all the novels that were forced to read in high school, I have a big problem with because I feel like they're just like meant to actually not make us think a lot of the time and are just the easy picks. There's a lot of clean like symbolism in this, and like the characters all fit into these. They're not allegorical, but they fit into these archetypal boxes really well. That's clean. You also, I'm sure, know that this has been one of the most influential novels in history of, American thought, but also in writing. So I can't rank this as low as I personally want to rank this, but I also can't rank it too high because it really is missing mythic weight. You can read something like a Moby Dick or some of these other novels we're going to talk about or we have talked about and really be transformed. I don't think that beyond some surface level analysis that The Great Gatsby really can take you that far. I don't know how much it can really make you contemplate America as a whole outside of this one idea, but it does it really well. I was talking about that with Gilead and some of these other things. It does feel somewhat limited, even though it's in the city. It does feel slightly limited to me. And so that's why I'm going to put it up at an 8.65, which, as you've heard from a lot of the scores, is pretty good. And me giving The Great Gatsby an 8.65 is, maybe to some of my classes that would just hear me rant about this book because it was mandatory reading in some of the schools I was at. They would be like, what? An 8.65? You made it seem like a 3.0. I did one class real dirty one time. We read in the first semester The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Mishima. Then we read All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. Then we read The Great Gatsby, and they were like, what the fuck is this, bro? Like, this sucks. I knew exactly what I was thinking. If I was trying to be kind, I would have put it at the start of the year for the mandatory reading. That poor class, man. I remember, if anyone has read The Sailor Who Fell from Grace from the Sea, there's all this voyeurism in there. And I remember like a son watching his mother get it on with people. I remember just the looks on some faces, like, it's like, yeah, man, people are crazy. And it's not that they're crazy, but this is the first time in your life that you've actually been inside their mind. So next up we have The Sun Also Rises. Yeah, let's get some Hemingway in here. Woo! So this is an interesting pick because this doesn't take place in America, but this novel is physically in Europe, but it is a spiritually American novel. It is dealing with the aftermath of the Great War. Jake Barnes in this story had to leave America because America doesn't make sense anymore, but they come to Europe and they are still Americans. They are still romantic. They are trying to be all these individualists. They're still hungry and way too passionate in like all the wrong ways, but it's now in a different world. It's also really cool because Hemingway's prose, this unsentimental, individualistic, short, minimalistic style that feels muscular and like you're getting punched. That's American. Hemingway is American. So he could be writing, the Green Hills of Africa or whatever, but the structure is that. I feel like though on this, there is a better selection that we're going to talk about. I feel like Hemingway's most genius pieces of literature are the Nick Adams stories by far. And a lot of these take place in America. Some take place during World War I, but as an American, obviously. And the way that Hemingway put trauma on the page makes the Nick Adams stories probably one of the greatest field guides to trauma in literature ever written, especially masculine trauma, the trauma that isn't shown, that you're not crying, talking about like, oh my God, I've been gaslit. Why are you emotionally abusing me? My wife is crazy. Porn ruined my life. Weed ruined my life. Alcohol ruined my life. Video games ruined my life. Like all this complaining that we hear now, which is, real problems. Like I get it. Like it's real problems and we're, being screwed over because of our dopamine systems and all this. But nonetheless, there is this old sensibility that, was here for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, that was our main operating system. And I feel like Ernest Hemingway captured it better in the Nick Adams stories than anyone else in history. And us being Americans, us being kind of the last frontier where you could kind of live that out at length and it didn't have these aristocratic tones to it. Because there's manly men everywhere, but we were simultaneously literate, educated, but had these open spaces, this freedom and this lack of control and a lack of culture and a lack of history. All of that worked really well for, a lot of American literature, but someone like Hemingway, just to kind of focus on a lack of through the lack of interiority, the deepest level of interiority, just this total iceberg minimalism that is on fire. That's what this is what true American masculinity is. Not the greasers, not the outsiders, that's all sensationalized. Not Gatsby, none of that. It's Nick Adams and what he went through in the war, his early life, Indian camp, his Big Two-Hearted River, what happens when he gets back, all that stuff, fire. So I'm going to put the Nick Adams stories up here at a 9.3. There it is, everyone. Highest so far, a 9.3. They're not, if you read them all in sequential order, they are, a novel length, and I feel like are one of the best contenders for the great American novel. And I'd throw The Sun Also Rises around like a 7.8, 7.9. So next we have John Steinbeck. And you guys, I have a whole video ranking. I actually have videos ranking Hemingway's, every Hemingway novel and every Steinbeck novel. If you guys are still here and you're interested in that, just type in Right Conscious, put their name and ranking, and you will find those videos. Really fun. As I've maybe heard me say before, my wife is a very big fan of John Steinbeck. And when we first started the talk, I am a fan, but I'm not like that big of a fan. I'm like, good, great, but not like epic. But she like thinks that he's like the man, like he's the great American novelist. I'm like, Moby Dick, and she read Moby Dick and she's like, yeah, good. But anyway, it was funny though, because she's like, I don't know if I could take you seriously when we first started dating if this is your opinion of John Steinbeck. Like, can I really trust some of your other picks? And I was like, bro, you gotta read Blood Meridian. Then she read Blood Meridian and she was like, oh fuck, Who's John Steinbeck? See the Child. Let's go, everybody. We're not even there yet. 10 out of 10, baby. I don't know if I'm giving it a 10 out of 10, but 10 out of 10, baby. Let's go. I could have put East of Eden in here. I could have put some other Steinbeck novels in here, but this is kind of like the most iconic one. So this one isn't going to be as high, like in the 9s for me, because it doesn't have the aesthetic scope. This is a social novel. It's a novel full of compassion. It's a sociological novel. All of that is great. And all of that is needed in America, where honestly, we don't really think a lot. We don't really have that much time to stop and reflect, even in our own, not just in literature, but in our own lives. Go, top of the GDP. Let's go, everybody. I don't feel like this novel has too much narrative innovation. I don't feel like there's a lot of originality in it. I feel like Steinbeck just found a really good story, a place, a situation that really mattered, and wrote a good novel surrounding it, but the situation made it into a great novel. I don't really know in my own study and thoughts how, not many people are influenced by Steinbeck. A lot of people like Steinbeck, but I think compared to some of these other authors like Faulkner, in terms of America and what we conceptualize as America, I don't really think Steinbeck is at the top of that list. And it's maybe because he was in the CIA. Go look it up. Speaking about everyone who I'm wearing, Kaczynski, Oswald, Steinbeck, all CIA assets. And if you don't believe me, he said, "Let me work for you. I want to be in the CIA." Shout out to John Steinbeck. And yeah, this novel isn't too interested in consciousness. It's not mysterious. There's no depth to it, like at a crazy level. It's just humanism, it's collectivism, and all that's cool. And it's done in a really clean way. And so we're going to throw it in at an 8.2. Moving forward. So next we have Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. We just read this for Southern Gothic Week and the Right Conscious Book Club. And the group didn't like her as much as Faulkner or some of the other authors we read in the Southern Gothic genre, which I thought was interesting. One of the problems with this novel is that the theology that she's pushing, I feel like, gets in the way of the narrative. So this novel is about a guy named Hazel Motes, who's this war veteran. He comes back to this, to where he's from in the South, and he makes his church, I think, like the Church Without Christ or something like that. And it turns into this like satirical novel, but it's about faith. O'Connor was a very devout Christian, a Catholic, and she's kind of writing through that. And she's a very original storyteller. She's, Southern Gothic, like she knows how to create these odd characters and these odd situations. We've all read her short stories before. And I feel like this was pushing toward the great American novel kind of level. But what's interesting about like an O'Connor and John Kennedy Toole, who we talked about earlier, funny enough, when right before Toole killed himself, he drove to O'Connor's house, toured it, and then did it. I feel like that line isn't like the black humor line. We kind of talked about this with Vonnegut too. I almost feel like the novels need to be longer. Like a Confederacy of the Dunces is actually really long, and after a while it actually becomes kind of like when's this going to end, because it's too slapsticky. But I feel like if Wise Blood and Slaughterhouse-Five were longer and slightly more aesthetically ambitious, I mean, I think O'Connor already has that down. I think like they actually could even rank higher for me, like really like. And so it's interesting, but it's hard to carry that through. It's hard to kind of have this lighthearted nature and be talking about some of these deeper themes and hold the line, because if you make your character too strong, then they're no longer this, humorous character like a Billy Pilgrim or a Hazel Motes, because this novel is about America being this land of fallen revelation, which is a really smart idea, which is Faulkner 101, but taken to the next level in O'Connor's case. And so O'Connor does ring that tear into she can show me something beautiful that's also full of tear all at the same time, and really great. But I feel like Wise Blood and some of our other novels, I'm feeling a 7.8 on this one. Like I said, I really feel like it was close, and it really maybe could have, I feel like just a little bit more ambition, I don't even know what it is. But I feel the potential energy when I read this, but something didn't land. Like we had 20 people in the call, and most of them read the 2 other books, and they said this was the weakest one. So, I mean, and that's when you're comparing it to to Faulkner, that's fine. But we were also talking about this obscure author who writes a Southern author, Harry Crews. And so there you go. So next we have On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which, is a good novel. I actually like Dharma Bums a little bit more, but a lot more people have read this one. I read Dharma Bum, speaking of being transformative, and I hitchhiked all the way from Logan, Utah when I was in college, all the way to Canada, to Calgary. That was a whole other story. Just to live it up and have some crazy stories that I've told before, which I will not subject you guys to right now. But I have a problem with the beats. I mean, I'll just say it. Like, I like their work. I like what they've done. You know, Burroughs, Kerouac, Snyder, Michael McClure. My favorite of all the beats is Jack Spicer, but who's like not really remembered or talked about at all. But I just don't really feel like they have that much. You know, when I compare them to like the modernists or the postmodernists and like where they fit into the entire equation, they just don't really feel as strong. This was a really influential book. This book kicked off like counterculture, individualism, and all that stuff in American culture. It was a really big deal. It was one of the first novels to really talk about like the new frontier of the highway and like how almost the Wild West transmuted into that. And the novel is very much focused on freedom and energy and Buddhism and all these things, but it doesn't really figure out how to talk about that and make it good. You know, I talk about how someone like a Tom Robbins he figured out how to write non-tragic stories in a way that are really revelatory and transformative. But this novel doesn't have anything like too revelatory, and it doesn't have anything too tragic, so it doesn't really have anything pulling it. And you know, that's kind of one of the points of the book, and it's, you know, non-being and all this other stuff. And I get that, and I do enjoy that, but I feel like On the Road's going to come in at a 6.8 for me. Like, it was the cultural book of the moment, and it is important, but there is so much more to be explored in that mindset, and I feel like other authors eventually did it. So next we have Tom Wolfe, Tom Wolfe's A Man in Full. And for any of my writers out there, if you want to learn how to write limited third person, this is one of the best novels to learn how to do it better. This is one of the best American close third person novels out there. This novel is about, this was recently adapted. I haven't seen the adaptation yet, but this novel is about an American businessman who is basically having this tragic fall, and we get to watch it across, 800 pages of it's definitely manic. Oh, look at this. Really cool cover. It can read flat at times. Tom Wolfe can be way too maximalist at times. And so I am going to throw it at a 6.7. It is a good book. Like I said, you should read it. Wolfe is in the conversation as one of these really good American novelists, but I really never feel like he figured out and synthesized a real vision of America and what it really means. And even if it doesn't really mean anything, and it's transient and it's all a dream and all this stuff, and it can all fall down, so what? And then the next was, then what, right? And Tom Wolfe never really figures that out for me, even though he tries to. That's the other problem. He tries to deliver answers, but they've never hit for me, so it's going to be in the high 6s. So next we have The Catcher in the Rye, and people always get pissed off when I talk about this book because I think it's good. I mean, I understand, but its depth, its vision, its ambition, its style isn't really there. And I get it. Its style was very influential. Almost every single alienated, angsty teen protagonist in literature is based off of Holden after this. Like, I get that. But is it really capturing what America is about, or did it program us to think that this is what America is about? This American disillusionment. The novel isn't that archetypal. It really isn't that epic. I feel like this is a very authentic novel. I don't question it. I understand a lot. It's a lot of the American swirling energies, the atoms, as I was talking about earlier, as Bloom says, all, put into this adolescent firecracker, but, just not really there for me. So I'm going to put it at a 6.4 to rough some feathers up. And I don't really know why I'm even, I'm going to be skipping a lot of these books. I think like a lot of these we read in high school books they're not the great American novel. Let's just be honest here. They're only that way because if you go to a bar, there's a good chance that, or you're talking to some rando at Thanksgiving, your sister's husband, you don't know what to say. There's a high chance that they've read The Catcher in the Rye and nothing else. And so it just gets this extra push by people because everybody was forced to read it. I remember one time before I became a teacher, I was like a substitute teacher for a year, and I walked in some English class and they were reading it, and I just went on like a full right conscious, but I was like 24-year-old rant on why the book sucked. And they're like, our teacher says that this is great. We're in AP literature. She's one of the best teachers in the city. I was like, your teacher is wrong, bro. She has no idea what she's talking about. So next we have Gravity's Rainbow, and I'm just gonna say it here, you guys. This has got to rank really, really high. All the stuff that I'm judging this on: psychological depth, ambition, scope, style, influence, talking about what America is, even though it's happening over in the war, the cosmos, all of that. I mean, I don't know what could be the better great American novel other than this. I mean, we could throw some other pinch-ons in there. We could talk about Mason and Dixon maybe. I would throw that up really high. I mean, just as high as this if we wanted to look at the entire situation a different way. But that book is definitely only like less than 1% as influential as this one. Like, this changed everything in literature. And so, I mean, I've talked about Gravity's Rainbow ad infinitum on this channel. If you guys want to see me talk about Gravity's Rainbow, you can go watch many of my other videos. But in terms of the great American novel, this has to be a 9.75, a 9.8 on my list. I mean, I don't know what category everything that I've said, it doesn't just completely max out in, especially when we're talking about these other novels. I get that it had the gift of time and that, like, you know, even like Moby Dick or some of these other novelists, you know, writing in, you know, modernist authors didn't have this like imaginative ability yet, but I don't know if they defined what was actually happening. And now in retrospect, Pynchon had everything right. Literally, he had everything right. All the conspiracies, all the ideas, how we're being programmed, the loss of self, the corporations, the technology, the Ivy League stuff, everything was right. It's insane, especially for when he was writing it. Like, he defined it, and it still stands today, which is, you know, it's made it 50 years, and I know it will make another 50 years. No one's writing stuff like this right now, and you know, I'm trying to get the engine going again. Let's go literary renaissance, but it's going to be pretty hard. We're going to need some really smart people to be releasing Gravity's Rainbow type of stuff, and so this is super high on my list. So next we have Libra by Don DeLillo, and I'm wearing the shirt, everybody. My shirts are going to be releasing soon. If you haven't read Libra yet and you love like the JFK assassination stuff, this novel basically says that it's all a conspiracy, and it's about Lee Harvey Oswald. It's basically following Lee Harvey Oswald among some other things. And I probably should have put like Underworld, shout out to Underworld right here, or Mao 2, or even his first novel, Americana, Ratner Sar. I've read almost every DeLillo novel except maybe some of the more recent ones, which I haven't been as big of a fan of, and I'll get to them soon. But Libra is a really good American novel because it's about the American bad boy, everybody. Like, you know, what can go wrong? But I feel like Libra doesn't have the weight as something like an Underworld does. I would probably throw a Libra around a 7.8 on the Great American Novel scale because it's more of an exploration of something more collective in the American mind. But Underworld, which I would call, oh my God, chaos happening behind me. Coyote America by Dan Flores is falling. But I would say that Underworld is DeLillo's magnum opus. And this is a big compliment, but I feel like Underworld touches the American sublime, something that I only feel like Moby Dick and a couple other novels touch. The reason I'm going to throw it at 9.2 is because it doesn't limit itself. You know, we're talking about The Great Gatsby. It's limited by its parties. It's limited by New York. This novel is not limited. It's prophetic. It's nostalgic. It talks about the death of America. If you have not read Underworld yet, it has to be on your to-read list, you know, even outside the Great American Novel conversation. And there's so many ambitious things going on, like time, the narrative going backward instead of forward, kind of signaling that we're decaying. There's so many things that we talk about and we feel today that Don DeLillo accomplished. And yeah, Don DeLillo is a heavyweight. And like I said, we are still waiting for people to take him to the next level. This is the next step past Gravity's Rainbow. Then we could say maybe Infinite Jest took it up. And, you know, so if you're interested in that lineage, if you're interested in postmodernism, this is not one of the harder books in that world. Like, Gravity's Rainbow can be a little bit obscure. Infinite Jest can be long-winded. Underworld does have sections that lags, but this is a really great place to start. And so, moving forward. So next we have Norman Mailer, and my boy Alistair, who has a channel named Post Mailer, may disagree with my ranking on this, but what Moby Dick did for the sea, what Blood Meridian did to the west, what the Red Badge of Courage did for the Civil War, Mailer was trying to get that done with The Naked and the Dead. And also his novel Harlot's Ghost, which is about the CIA. He was trying to write this CIA novel, which I think William T. Volman is going to finally accomplish, writing a great one this March. Table of Fortune, let's go, everybody. But I feel like the scope is here. The vision and the ambition is here. But I feel like Mailer, and this is just my opinion, I feel like his language and his style isn't that good. It rings pretty flat at times, and at times in all of his work, it feels like I'm trudging through it. A lot of these great American novels really don't have that. I feel like that's partially because of Mailer's, journalism, and he never really throughout his career broke free from that. And it sucks because the depth is there, the vision is there, but I'm going to throw The Naked and the Dead at a 7.1 in terms of being the great American novel. So next we have Dennis Johnson's Tree of Smoke, which I feel like is the best Vietnam novel out there. I love Tim O'Brien, I love many of them, but Dennis Johnson is the GOAT. In terms of style and vision, he is insane. Does it speak on America though very deeply? And I feel like it's hard to tell because Johnson really didn't affect the national conversation and really the scene of writing, because a lot of these authors like Johnson that really started to push in the 80s and 90s and blow up and didn't hit the level of fame like David Foster Wallace and have all the, this is water speech and all the fanaticism, their styles never really got adopted. They never really got the credit that they were due. And I don't think that this is the greatest American novel of all time. But if you liked Moby Dick, if you liked Blood Meridian, this novel feels like that at times. If you liked Apocalypse Now in the form of a novel. And because of that, even though it's lacking in really commentary on America, it's lacking in a lot of philosophical resolution, which is somewhat important as we're kind of talking about, and it's taking place away from America, I'm gonna have to put it at an 8.2. But a lot of Johnson's work is really good, and I feel like Johnson is one of the greatest American authors of all time. If you've not read Johnson, we are reading this on December 8th, I think, in the Right Conscious Book Club, so you still have time to go read Tree of Smoke, and we're reading Moby Dick on Saturday. We're reading a lot of these novels because that's what we do in the book club. We read the best novels of all time. But Tree of Smoke, absolute game changer, really good novel. I just reread it. Mind blown. So Sometimes a Great Notion by Ken Kesey is one of the best American novels ever. And spoiler, I'm going to rank this really, really high. This is the dark horse great American novel. This is the greatest novel about the Pacific Northwest ever written. This novel is way better than Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is really good and obviously got adapted and is much more famous. But this novel is about a logging family and their fight against the Union. And it sounds kind of dumb, but it is the ultimate novel. It's the ultimate troll novel. It's satirical, it's literary, it's a tragedy, it's got archetypes. I mean, it is better than The Grapes of Wrath. Like, if you're just comparing novels, if we're talking about sociological novels, it's better. It's more literary. Kesey, if you like him, if you like his personality, if you like what he was about, this is about his Oregon. Kesey was from Oregon. This is about where he was from, what he believes in, what happened, what he really feels like America is about, like the lumber yards. I mean, there was a really funny movie adaptation of this. I can't say enough good things about this. Everyone that read this for our book club absolutely loved it. Said, oh my God, this is one of the greatest American novels of all time. In terms of style, great. In terms of scope and ambition, really good. We're talking about Union Wars and all of that, amazing. Talking about a unique novel in the Pacific Northwest, this PNW epic, there are very few like this, if any, that can compare to this. Did it change the conversation? Did it change American writing forever? No, because it, I think, was too much for people. I don't think that people really wanted to, I don't know, it doesn't have some of the epic nature stuff, but I feel like on an archetypal and a character level, it's as strong as any novel that you're going to pull. Like, it's better characters than Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, like not aristocratic, people that you and I can relate to. Like, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking of family members, I'm thinking of all this stuff. Sometimes a Great Notion is an absolute banger by Ken Kesey, and I feel like it's one of the best American novels of the 20th century, and so I'm going to rate it at, hear me out, a 9.5, everybody, putting it at the top of the leaderboard, or not at the top, but very near the top of the leaderboard right now. And so, moving forward. So next up, we have Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko, which is, in my opinion, I would say the best Native American novel ever written. It is absolutely amazing in terms of taking that genre and American indigenous voices to the next level. It is amazing. I love it. It's obviously from the Southwest, where I'm from, but Silko is ambitious in this novel. She writes this surreal novel about a World War II veteran who's come back and has realized that the ceremonies of old aren't able to heal him anymore, that his PTSD is too strong, and that he has to go find and create a new ceremony. And it's absolutely genius. Let me just tell you guys. Silko is a great writer. The more I reread this, the more I think about it, the better it gets. It plays on this idea of What does it mean to be an indigenous American who gave up everything and now has nothing? What does it mean to be on one of these tribes where you are impoverished and don't have anything? Everyone around you is an alcoholic. What does it mean to even be an outsider in one of those groups? And so the identity questions are really strong, but I don't really feel like it necessarily answers a lot of great American novel identity questions, but it is really influential. It changed Native American fiction writing forever. It looks at America from a totally different angle, so I'm going to throw it in at an 8.2. So next we have The Known World by Edward P. Jones, which is one of the best novels of the 21st century by far. And earlier I was talking about James by Percival Everett and slavery and, the ambitious novel. And so I'm going to give you guys basically the quick synopsis that you could read on the back cover of this. So this is about a former slave who is freed and then becomes a slave owner himself. It's basically a retrospect over his entire life and throws a wrench into the entire slavery conversation, which, first of all, that ambition, that willingness makes it rank higher on the list. And much like Beloved, is really important that it's not just about what's happening or what happened, but also some of the gray morality and some of the crazy choices and problems that stem from all that, because that's what we go to literature for, right? I can go read a novel that is just about the horrors of slavery, but I could also go read a history book for that, or listen to a podcast. I've actually listened to a bunch of great series on that, and those are probably more effective if that's what I'm looking for, because there are terrible stories to be found everywhere. But to get this deep, omniscient level of thought and complexity into a single story, into a single man, and the interconnected web of his life and his choices and all of this, that's something, across 500 pages, that's something that you can't get in a 700-page novel about slavery in America or wherever. And one of the reasons why we love Blood Meridian and Judge Holden is we see this idea like humans are violent by design, but there's a cosmological order to that. Or in Moby Dick, there's something similar. In Faulkner, there's something similar. And Jones taps into that in this novel. He taps into what I said earlier, not all the way, but he does touch the sublime. He does overpower with the narration, the style, the prose, the scope. All of it is really good. And that's why I'm going to put it all the way up at an 8.9 on my Great American Novel list. Really good stuff. One of the best novels of the 21st century by far, especially coming out of America. Let's go America. And let's now move on to our next novel. So speaking of books that we had to read in school, next is The Scarlet Letter. And I had to include this one by Nathaniel Hawthorne because this is the beginning of American modernity. This is one of the first novels in American history, if not the first, to bring American self-consciousness into the picture. This is one of the first novels that really brought, I don't know how to say it, a fine art, a high art, a literary style to the American word, especially in the realm of fiction. And being the progenitor of that makes it really big. Plus, when you look back at it, it was about such an important issue. We were just talking about Gilead and this Puritan mindset and making it poetic again. But the Scarlet Letter, was a deeply archetypal novel. Really did make the Puritan kind of world into this psychological case study. And that's why so many classes love to read it and talk about it. It's good for conversation. And sadly, many great books, kids can't read Animal Farm anymore. My students hate it. They can't just wrap their heads around animals that talk. They're this is dumb. They can't do it. This one is starting to slowly slip away. There's certain novels that are becoming too classic for the modern kid. And so now we have to read something dumb if we want to keep them interested. Even if I go crazy, I could be going full 110%. And it's not enough. And what's so interesting about this novel is that we've already talked about Moby Dick, being, maybe the great American novel, but it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this, because Hawthorne and Melville were friends. And when he read and saw the Scarlet Letter when it was published, it turned him on to a whole new level of writing. And immediately after that, he went and wrote Moby Dick. And so there's no Moby Dick without this novel, which is insane. Because if you look at other Melville novels that were about the sea, White Jacket, Redburn, some of these other ones, they were just adventurous. They had this ironic tone. They had some of these character elements within them that, some of this tension that we see. But the Scarlet Letter showed him that there could be metaphysics in America, in our own soul, and that this Puritan mindset could be implemented into American fiction. And then Melville took that to an entire new level. And so I'm going to throw the Scarlet Letter here at a 9.05. Shout out to Hawthorne for influencing Hemingway, and let's get going. So someone I've only talked about once on this channel is Saul Bellow and his novel Herzog, which is kind of one of the preeminent novels that helped, I think, influence people like McCarthy and Roth with this kind of moral hyper intellect. Because when you read like David Foster Wallace, who we'll talk about in a second, a lot of his characters are moral and they're like thinking way too much about things. So this novel is another actually novel that I forgot to mention about an academic, right? We have this whole history of novels about academics like Stoner, The Tunnel, I can't remember them all. In America, Pin by Vladimir Nabokov. I could name, I recently did an interview with John Pistelli, who we're about to talk about in a second, and we were talking about the novels about academics. But this intellectual Moses Herzog is, living this crappy life. His wife has just left him. And this novel is basically about a breakdown in his consciousness. He starts writing letters to everybody. He starts writing letters to Eisenhower and Spinoza and Nietzsche, his ex-wife, everybody. And you're seeing what he's doing. He's basically collapsing. And eventually he's drifting around. And it's a very internal novel. It really set the stage for some of the novels I'm about to talk about in a second. And that's why I wanted to mention it and kind of give it some light. It's a really good novel, especially if you're interested in this lineage. It's like at the base of it. It struggles though, especially compared to some of the things I'm going to talk about. I don't think it really accomplishes enough in terms of its analysis of the soul of an American. It's kind of a bit cliche at times, so I'm going to throw it in at a 6.4, but a novel that it did influence. So next we have William Gass's The Tunnel, which is a ridiculous novel, you guys. It's one of these kind of postmodernist mazes, but this is also about an academic, a historian, who's writing his memoir in a basement while digging through his wall. It's really weird, and he's supposed to be writing an introduction to a book on Hitler and the morality of Hitler and all this stuff. But he starts writing his own confessions. It's like if Nick Fuentes just started typing and he was 10 times, 100 times smarter than he actually was, but he was just down there and he just kept going. He wasn't on video. And it's such a weird novel because he's obsessed with this, how did all these intellectuals in Germany, right? These people who, some of them were very educated, or just, in general, some of these common people, how'd they get duped into Nazism? How did they get their morality ripped away to, not just, a lot of them didn't know what was happening to the Jews necessarily in these huge encampments, but just against their fellow citizens. How did they let their freedoms get so far ripped away from them? And it's interesting because it's like that Nietzsche quote, when you stare into the abyss stares at you, you become the monster. And so as this novel progresses, he starts to explore his hubris, his misogyny, his anti-Semitism. Like I said, it's literally like if Nick Fuentes started typing and just kept going. And you get this confession, but it's interesting. It's really interesting. And I'm not trying to get political here, or even shame, guilty, point the finger here. But at some level, if we let it out, if you just let it out, so many people have an HR department behind them, and we have to live these very constrained lives. We never really get to let it out. We never get to, sometimes I'm journaling and I'm saying some crazy shit, because it's just coming out of my unconscious, but this is that on fire. And so this novel it's like the Divine Comedy, but for the sad boys. It's just wild. The style is on point. I was reading it and it was one of these novels I was like, dude, this is too dense at times. Jesus Christ. And Jonathan Franzen was his student. He influenced David Foster Wallace. And I know someone from a foreign country, right? And she is dating someone in America. And he I think listens to a lot of American commentary and stuff. I would just, anyway, and she can't believe the things that she says. She likes him apparently, maybe even loves him, wants to be with him. But what he says about politics and women and all this other stuff is like blowing her mind. And she's like, if someone over here in Australia said this, I know like my cousins in Canada feel this way. Like if people up here were saying this like normally and like like we would be freaked out. But in America, it's commonplace, you know? And so it's interesting. That's really a part of the American soul. We have these crazy shot jocks. Like we've kind of taken up that helm, you know, you look back at like Europe, there were the Julius Evolas, all these crazy dudes. But in terms of like taking things to the limit and saying things, we have kind of led that because we're leading, I feel like we've led the artistic revolution. We've led the culture in the world for a long time, but we've also had the freedom to be able to do it. China doesn't have the freedom to do it. Plus we have the political disparity to be able to do that. You know, like we have people like Marilyn Robinson, who's born in Idaho and raised there. People like David Lynch, raised in Idaho. You know, all these but then they go off to these super liberal colleges in Philadelphia or in the Ivy League. And it's like, we have all this flow and you have all this freedom. And both sides, as we see, are very polarized. You know, like are what we call the left wing in America is like, are the moderates in Europe, or maybe even slightly right wing. You know, it's so funny. And our right wing are like, what the hell? Like they're the extremists over in Europe or in Canada. And so anyway, you know, and so that is a real part of America. I don't know if this novel gets it directly. It's kind of it's way too long. It's way too crazy to call it the Great American Novel, but it does tap into something that's real, that's important in America, that like is, you know, obviously an actual real thing. And so I'm going to give it an 8.4 on the list, which is a really high ranking, but it's not really the Great American Novel for everybody. It's not really, don't really hand this one out to somebody. So next on the list, we have Infinite Jest by my boy, David Foster Wallace. You know, my big goal is to have an entire bookshelf filled of Infinite Jest, man. It's going to be a happy day. I'm going to start a fundraiser soon for that, dude. It's going to I want to troll so hard, man. I want to make like the most clickbaity, rage-baity title that I've ever done. Like just go all the way and be in an Infinite Jest shirt with the cover on it, and then have the entire shelf filled with Infinite Jest stacked up on the table everywhere, and not say a word about it, but just do the video as is. That day will come one of these days. But the Great American Novel, Infinite Jest, interesting question, because it really does deal with these huge problems in modern American life. Family trauma, which everybody has, but like modern trauma, and especially this kind of suburban trauma. Sports, our obsession with sports here in America. We love sports. You know, you look how good we do at the Olympics. Like, it's a real thing. And then entertainment and our passion for entertainment. So those are three really big things in kind of America, but I don't feel like Wallace executes it. Like, I love this novel, but I feel like in terms of the Great American Novel, I don't know if Wallace is really attacking America, but rather other things like addiction, like the soul. You know, this does take place all across America. It takes place in Boston, in Tucson, mostly in those locations, a little bit in some other spots. And it deals with all people. It has a spiritual bent. It deals with, you know, excluded characters, addicts, and random people, you know, deals with the adolescent people. It deals with suicide, deals with all these different things. And so I think that makes it really important, but I don't think it can go higher than a 9 in my estimation, because it's too self-aware. It's too postmodern. It isn't trying to be that. Like Don DeLillo and like Underworld, like he's trying to write about America. David Foster Wallace isn't trying to write about America in that sense. He's trying to enter the soul, but not in the way that like Moby Dick does. He's not trying to talk about the American soul or the cosmos. He's trying to talk about something that everybody across the world can relate to. And that's why I think he's very popular. I think that's why he has more appeal than, you know, some of these other novels that have even been written in the last 30 or 40 years that haven't got off the ground in the worldwide community as much, because these are human problems Wallace is dealing with, like addiction to weed, like stuff like that. Like that's a worldwide thing. And I know a lot of foreign people that love this novel. I know less foreign people that are into some of these other novels that are maybe not as famous that I'm talking about. And so because of that, and because I don't think that Wallace, I think he outright rejected trying to do that by bringing it. He actually made America into a superstate. In Infinite Jest, North America is all just one big country. And so it is America, but it's not America. It's really, and with the Eschaton stuff, it's really interesting. So I'm going to give Infinite Jest about an 8.5 4-3 on my Great American Novel ranking because it has a lot of those elements, but it doesn't step into it. It didn't change how we conceptualize ourselves exactly as Americans. It just showed us what we were. Like, yeah, this is where we're at. Like, holy crap, this is where we're heading. But it didn't, I don't know. But great novel another way, It's definitely in the 9s on my list if we're just talking about ranking it as a novel. Next, we have Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady. And this novel is really interesting because it's one of these novels that deals with consciousness and women entering the plane of self-awareness, because women have been self-aware, throughout all of time. But when you receive an education, when you go and travel to Europe and get marriage proposals and all this stuff, you enter into a new league of leisurely thought, right? That many of us now experience today. Anyone who went through the public education system and can read, we're all basically self-aware, or many of us are self-aware. And so Isabel in this novel would be, we've been talking about a lot of atoms, a lot of these strong men, strong characters, but there is a fall that happens in this novel that James lays out that we could say is the eve of American literature, because it's not this, she doesn't have a moral failure. She isn't a sexual deviant or something like that, but she has an epistemological failure. She becomes too self-aware. She becomes too inundated in her own mind. She is choosing her own mind, her own perception, her own version of reality. And instead of trying to limit that, because sometimes limiting your perception, limiting your experience, now how has the eat, pray, love lifestyle worked out for all those chicks who are now 40? Many of them have returned and wanted to either work a stable job or have a family and all that. It isn't what it is touted out to be, and never has been. A lot of the time we need constraints in our life, and trying to go all the way is usually should be reserved for those true wanderers, for those true acolytes, and people who are disciplined enough to go out there and return back. Because someone that goes and doesn't return, what's the point of going in the first place, unless you're going to come back to society and give us some kernels of wisdom, or, to help out a little bit. And so this novel, I would say, predates like Nabokov and many of these other things, because James is focusing on American aesthetics. As Tolstoy's thinking about it, and Mishima is going to turn up the dial a couple decades later in Japan. And what something that many of these authors tackle is this idea of, what if you create this aesthetic prison? What if your imagination isn't something that's liberating, but just leads you to being stuck? And we've seen this now a ton with the digital age, right? There are so many people who have all this knowledge, they're inundated with knowledge, but they're doing nothing. That's why we can't kick off a literary renaissance, because there are so many people out there who have read way more than me, who are listening to me right now and being like, oh, I could do better than Right Conscious, but you're not doing anything, whoever that person is out there. We need players in the game. We need people to rip themselves out of paralysis and start integrating the knowledge. That's our greatest failure as in our education system, that there are plenty of nerds out there, logic bros, losers who have a ton of knowledge, but it means nothing because it's all about integrating it. And if it isn't, then it's just an interloper in your soul that's actually causing havoc. And so this novel, and James in general, is really important. He really was a spearhead to bring consciousness into American literature in a new way. One could say even more of a social way that actually has some depth to it. And so I'm going to throw this one pretty high at a 9.1, because I feel like it's the baseline for so much that comes after it, and is very ambitious, and is a really good picture of the inversion of this American exceptionalism. And so moving forward, it is time, everyone, to talk about William Faulkner and Absalom. And, I'm just going to say, this is one of the great American novels of all time, everyone. I mean, you will hear me talk about it, and this takes the idea of the American dream, that you can just show up, here from wherever, and you can build a dynasty. You can really make it, and shows us really how it works, because the main character of this, Thomas Sutpen, grows up, as this poor boy, and he dreams of becoming rich. And that dream in the 19th century, when this takes place, is run on slavery. And like many Faulkner novels, the framing of this novel, the telling of this novel is very fragmented and done by a chain of randos, as I like to say. Just like, who? And that's why it's so beautiful that the first couple parts are a reimagining in like the early 1910s of what happened during this kind of slave narrative, how this all came to power. There's imaginations, there's filling the gaps, there's doing like what I do a lot of the time with authors' personal lives. All this is forged, and this is a metaphor. This is the idea of America remembering itself and how we try to do it. This is like this narrative functioning happening in memory, which is like, as I was saying like an hour ago, was with, I think, Gilead. Like that's what Faulkner does so well in this novel. He works with time. And what makes that even better is Faulkner's prose. If you've ever read Faulkner, his beautiful encyclopedic language, his long sentences, they just meander around, but it brings the energy of the story of the past, of people obsessing about the past in the present to the page in such a wild way, because that's what we do. We obsess about these stories. We obsess about World War II or the Civil War and all this stuff. And there's a symbiotic relationship between it talking to us and us talking to it, and us ever, changing it as we move along. Another reason I like this, and it includes really my top three, which is Absalom. I mean, I could throw in any other Faulkner novel. There's other Melville novels and other McCarthy novels, but all of them, maybe outside of McCarthy, have clean symbols. Like this novel reads like you don't really get confused. It doesn't really feel like you don't understand some of the archetypal and symbolic things that Faulkner is pushing, which does help it. It is better for, it to be the great American novel. It can't be The Tunnel or even Infinite Jest or some of these other novels, even Underworld. They're too hard. Absalom, Moby Dick, Blood Meridian. People can read this. I've had many high schoolers read. I don't think anyone's ever read Faulkner, but I've had plenty read Blood Meridian and Moby Dick before. I also like how this novel covers the South. It's in the Caribbean. It's in a college dorm room. It's all really great. And this novel really shows like where the dream comes from, how it's built, and who pays for it, and what happens when that comes back and it turns into a tragic novel. And so I am going to give this a 9.87 out of 10 in terms of the great American novelness. If you have not read this, now is the time. There is no better time than right now to read this. And so, boom. Moving on to our next novel, which is, of course, Blood Meridian. And it was so funny. I just went and searched for this image so I could put it on the screen. And I saw one of my own videos, which always makes me smile when I'm doing research, and my video is the answer to the research I'm doing. I'm like, damn. Anyway, so Blood Meridian. Talked about it literally hundreds of times, if not thousands of times on this channel. Why is it the great American novel? Because it is on fire. I mean, it is the greatest Western out there. It's the greatest anti-Western out there. It blew that genre on fire. It took the stylistic standard of American fiction to the next level. Sentence by sentence, who is doing this? It took the framing to the next level. It has one of the best villains in literature. It has some of the best symbolism ever done in literature. Has some of the best nature passages ever done in literature. It has ruminations on God, on war, everything that you want. It has action. It has no love scenes, none of that weighing it down. It has cowboys. It has Indians. What else could you want? What else really is America? It is conscious. The narration of it is odd and limited in all the perfect ways. Its epilogue looks toward the future and makes commentary on that. There are glimmers of hope, but lots of glimmers of darkness. I mean, oh my God, you guys. And so if you don't know, Blood Meridian follows a group of scalp hunters who go down into Mexico and are being paid to just get scalps. And what's the difference between a Mexican and an Indian? There really isn't one, I mean, they're all from the same region. And so it turns into a bloodbath. It turns into just insanity. And leading this pack is a guy named Judge Holden, who is this high IQ individual who is this very large man who's albino, who the gang found sitting naked on a rock. He has supernatural strength. He's just a crazy guy. He's super violent, super perverted, like all these terrible things, gives these crazy speeches. I mean, it's Moby Dick on fire. I mean, it's Moby Dick in the present. And so really, this is a better novel than Moby Dick. I mean, just pound for pound. But, for the time it was written, that's what we have to kind of contemplate. This was written in the 1980s, and Moby Dick was obviously written a century before that. So we kind of have to, if not a little bit, even more than a century, we kind of have to weigh, well, what was a bigger accomplishment at the time. And I think Moby Dick falls into that category. But I think that Blood Meridian beats Absalom because I feel like what McCarthy did with this was just insane. A bigger accomplishment than what Faulkner did, especially because this was his first Western. This bro shows up on the scene. He's been doing Southern Gothic novels and he just writes a Western and it's this good. Faulkner had been doing, Southern work for a minute. And so, I mean, just that McCarthy came on the scene and tore it up. And you could say that All the Pretty Horses is one of the great American novels. That is in the 9s. The Crossing's in the 9s. No Country for Old Men's probably in the high 8s. Suttree is in the mid to high 9s, in my opinion. Like Outer Dark, I feel like I feel like almost every McCarthy novel is in the 7s to the 9s, which is insane. He, in terms of being the great American author, I don't think that anybody has more books that hit that like in the 9, high 8s or 9s category on the great American novelist list than McCarthy. And so, I do love him, but he truly is our American author, like our hero. Like when you want to give a book to someone and say, this is America, I think that Cormac McCarthy is the best representation of it because he deals with all the different times. He deals with the modern world and and No Country for Old Men and The Passenger and then, apocalyptic stuff with The Road and then all this historical stuff. And then the South, there's all this really cool stuff. Yeah. And so if you guys want more on McCarthy, I did a 2.5 hour breakdown of McCarthy and where I rank every single one of his novels. It just came out, so go check that out if you guys want more McCarthy content. And so I am going to give this a 9.95, which puts it in second place right now. Absolutely wonderful. You gotta love it, everybody. Blood Meridian has got it. If you have not read it, please go read it right now. I would say the same about a lot of these books. Moving on. Next, we have Stoner by John Williams. And Stoner is one of the great American heroes in literature. And I feel like really embodies what being an American is really about. This kind of humble, put your head down and feel and just continue going forward. And the writing is clean. It's fast. It's sentimental. It has a beautiful framing, beautiful narration. Really not the most influential novel. Really has risen to fame recently, especially because of TikTok, among other things. The same with Butcher's Crossing. Like John Williams has started to get this revival. John Williams, he will be forever remembered by me as the guy who did the Hook soundtrack, not the author, but I mean, Hook is one of the best movies. What do you want to talk about? American movies. And I know Peter Pan is Scottish, / English and all that, but Steven Spielberg, I know he resents this movie, but he really shouldn't. I mean, absolutely spectacular. Anyway, don't get me going on Hook. Stoner isn't that ambitious, but I don't think it really tries to be. So I'm going to, but that does hold it back. It really is a beautiful picture of the American male mind and like journey and all these things and the humbleness. And I know plenty of women. I know more women than men that like this. So it's really not kind of a male female thing in this instance. And so I'm going to give this novel, I'm going to throw this at like a 7.7 on the Great American Novelness scale because it really doesn't deal with these mythic proportional stuff, but it does deal with the individual American soul, I think, very well. Next, we have the Illuminatus Trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea. So this is kind of a gag novel. This is a fun novel. I like Robert Anton Wilson, even though as time passes, he was probably a psyop in and of himself. But who knows, with everyone in this, it's just hard to tell what was happening back then. Hard to tell what's happening today. But this is a fun novel that really dives into the idea of conspiracies in America and why we believe them and why we're so obsessed with them, more so than any other country. And it's one of the better explorations of that and our feeling toward conspiracies. And so I consider it a great American novel in that sense because we have a culture surrounding it and it kicked a lot of that off. It was the fiction Bible for a while of that group in time. It doesn't really have too many mythic overtones. It doesn't go too deep in that regard, but still, its style isn't very deep. Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea aren't stylists by any means. They're not even that great of writers. They can pass it by, but it's a classic novel that did impact a lot of people. Maybe not as much in this generation, but very influential on the whole conspiracy world, which is now blown up. Everyone's into it. And so I'm going to give this a 6.4 on the Great American Novelness scale, even though I do love this series. Next, we have Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. And great novel. I have a great list. Top 10 Western novels. If you guys are into Westerns, I spend over an hour talking about Western novels. This, of course, made the list. McMurtry has written a lot of really good stuff. The style isn't very big in this one. The cosmic scope, the Americanness is there just because it's in every single novel, but it really doesn't get over the hump, I feel like, in a lot of the major categories that like a Blood Meridian maybe does. And so even though it's this sprawling epic, it is somewhat limited in scope, I feel like, but it's still really good. So I'm going to throw this at an 8.1. Absolutely love it. I think that McMurdy wrote too fast. I think that if he kind of sat down on some of this stuff and drafted like a McCarthy, if he took this story and spent 3 or 4 more years on it, I think that this could be one of the greatest novels of all time, honestly. Great concept, great writing, but I think McMurdy was just too fast with it. Who am I to say anything? That's what he was doing. But, these volume writers at times are, they just put out consistently good, to great novels and, have a couple breakthroughs. I'd be interested to see what they would look like if they spent a little bit more time. And so, everyone, that brings us to the end. Did you really think this was the end? Look at me, everyone. Your boy shaved. Your boy changed into the cozy wear because I couldn't sleep until I got through this entire list. It's 12:21 in the morning, and the literary renaissance will not sleep until we make it happen, until we push back against the publishing houses, the McMFA factories, the doom and gloomers, the deconstructor and destroyers. I don't care who the enemy is. We are going to run right over them with our literary power. And so, do you guys really think that I was going to forget Mark Twain, Gaddis, Barth? The list goes on, and we're not done just yet, everybody. So I'm in the cozy wear, my hair's wet, but my brain is a locomotive. Let's go. I'm so excited I can't even wait for my hair to dry. I want to do this. So next we have Kate Chopin's The Awakening. I absolutely love this novel. This novel was very influential on Robert Stone, who we'll be talking about here in a second, and one of his novels. But the problem with The Awakening is that it's just too short. The symbolism there, the commentary on women and the awakening of women there, but I feel like it needs more. And I understand why it's short, but I really don't think it fits into this kind of broader conversation of the great American novel because of its length. And so I'm going to put it down at a 5.6. I could throw The Bell Jar into the same category as many of these novels we've been talking about, but just kind of like The Awakening. Too small in scope, not long enough. The lyricism in there, the influence is there, but the mythic, symbolic undertones, the ambition really isn't there. The Bell Jar, it's so funny. I'm rereading this right now with my wife, and definitely is not the great American novel. 5.5. Speaking of novels that are too short, we have The Middle Passage by Charles Johnson. I also love The Oxherding Tale by Charles Johnson. The Middle Passage is a really cool novel, but it's too short, and at times the narrative voice is unrealistic, in my opinion. It doesn't really tap into the mythic. It has a lot of fun stories, but it doesn't really know what it wants to be. It's not Melvillian. It's the black humor isn't there. Obviously, it's dealing with the Middle Passage in these things, but it's not like about like people who get on a ship and go. It's about a black man who gets onto this slave ship and is suddenly along for the journey, and talking about all these accounts and this crazy stuff going on. And so Johnson in this one and another one, The Oxherding Tale, I feel like is getting close to touching gold, but really falls short. I don't know what it is, even though, like I said, these are good novels. But in terms of the great American novel conversation, 6.1. I would say that Edward Jones and The Known World is much better, if we're like talking about this categorically. Next, we have To Kill a Mockingbird, which came out in 1960, and I don't think that this is a strong novel for a great American novel contention at all. We were all forced to read this. We all know what this is. We all have a soft spot for Atticus Finch and Boo Radley and all this stuff. Like, I get it. But at the end of the day, this was published in 1960, you guys. When we compare it to the strength of many of the novels that we're talking about, whether we're talking about the mythic angle, the psychological depth, the morality, the lessons, the transformative elements, the influence, all of this stuff, it's not really there. It's just become a huge deal in our culture. It's kind of one of these cornerstone books, but I don't really feel like it taps into the great American novel conversation at all. Even though it does touch on important things, I feel like I could mention about 20 plus of the books we just talked about that explore similar things, but just do it much better. Like I said, it gets credit because it's short, it's accessible, you can give this to people, it's touching, there's a good adaptation of it, like yada, 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 but definitely not it. 5.4. Dude, this outfit's making me a little bit brutal. Okay, I put some of my merch on and now I'm trying to cool down a little bit. But I just have to tell you guys that giving a 5.5 to Kill a Mockingbird and talking crap about Catcher in the Rye feels great. I remember when I lived in Las Vegas, everyone, when I was growing up, my mom would be like, why aren't you out partying right now? You're wasting your life away. Why are you reading? And I said, one day I'm going to blow minds. One day I'm going to have the hottest takes on books ever. And I would tell her that. One day I'm going to change the world with my thoughts. And here I am, everyone. If you are still listening, it is living proof that I am doing it. Let's go. Do you think that we're even close to being done? We have such a long ways to go, everyone. And so next that we have to talk about Philip Meyer's The Sun, one of the best Westerns ever, one of the best books released in the last 12 or 15 years. Philip Meyer is one of the better authors that's near 50 years old or younger right now. This is an epic, multi-generational novel dealing with Texas, Tejas, everyone, the Comanches, everything that you love. If you liked Blood Meridian, if you liked All the Pretty Horses, all of that stuff, then you will love The Sun by Philip Meyer. This is one of the torchbearers of McCarthy's legacy, in my opinion. I don't think that he hits the prose at the same level that McCarthy does. I don't think that there's the symbolic weight, but the storytelling, the Western romantic feeling, all of that is there. Very strong American novel, one of the strongest great American novels of the past 20 years. And so I'm going to throw it at an 8.5, which is a huge ranking. And speaking of recent novels, this May, a new novel came out titled Major Arcana by John Pistelli. I just interviewed Pistelli for 2 hours over on my Substack for free. You guys can go check that out. I try to do weekly interviews over there for free with authors or just conversations about books or stuff like that. So for all the free subscribers. And so this is a wild novel. This novel is about this novel covers the internet better than any other book. This is a wild novel. This novel follows a former famous author turned professor named Simon Magnus. And at the start of the novel, this isn't a spoiler, there are two students, and there's a girl filming another student, and the other student shoots himself. And they were both these students of Simon Magnus. And it kicks off this epic multi-generational story of trauma and the occult and the internet's effect on our society, on just so many crazy things. Like, this is a really wild novel. I love this novel. This is one of the most cool things I have read in a really long time. Like I said earlier, we don't support authors enough and new authors, and we have this obsession with the classics, the great American novels, getting through the list. Buy this book. There's a book on this list that you should buy. You're literally supporting John Pistelli. Like, you're literally supporting a dude who is out there writing some good stuff, who is trying to talk about really important topics. Like, this is a troll novel, you guys. Like, he talks about, like, if you're sick of gender pronouns, like, and like, if you experience that and like everyone like going crazy over all that, and you were like rolling your eyes when everyone's like, put your pronouns in your email signature and all of this stuff. This novel takes that concept and brings like a Melvillian omniscient narrator analysis to that concept. Did you just hear what I said? Like, it's a wild novel. And Pistelli isn't some like right-wing wacko, but he's also not some wacko woke person. He's just observing all the insanity that's happening and just using it to write really cool narratives. It's a really wild stuff. So hear me out here. There is such a thing as recency bias for sure, but this is the best novel of the 2020s that I have read. It is better than, I won't start dissing on too many people, but it's a really good novel. It's a novel that's about America. It's like a huge exploration of modern America, on modern technology and our relationship with it, on our political system, on what's happening to our kids, on so many different things. Give it a chance. Read it in its entirety, and I promise you that you will like it. And Pistelli is a living man. He is a dude who is out here grinding, trying to be a full-time author. You could literally send him a message and he'll talk to you. I just hit him up randomly and said, hey, and he's like, yeah, I'm a fan of the channel. He's a fan of Right Conscious, so let's go and support him, everybody. Why not? Am I right or am I right? Like, You will see really good stuff here. It was also first serialized on Substack. Speaking of the literary renaissance, Pastelli started writing this on Substack, then got a publishing deal that's the first time that's ever happened. World's first. That's crazy. And he proved that you don't need to get an agent, that you don't need to save your novel or not publish it anywhere, that you can literally post your novel online for free and then get a publishing deal from it and get reviews in the Wall Street Journal and all these other crazy places. Get talked about on Right Conscious. And so I'm going to give this another 8.5. Really awesome novel. Next up we have, so it's going to ruffle some feathers, but that's what we do here. I feel like Catch-22 is a period piece of sorts. I feel like this novel has withstood this test of time a little bit, but really is only relevant in its little pocket. It really never broke out of its influence, one could say, into like the counterculture and all this other stuff. I don't really feel like this going to break into the 9s for me. I'm contemplating it even getting into the 8s, but I think compared to like a Slaughterhouse-Five, it's not as strong. Slaughterhouse-Five is an anti-war novel, but when I look at like the bureaucratic madness of Catch-22, it really only matters in like the sense of Cold War absurdity, but it isn't like Doctor Strangelove. It doesn't really hit that level. It doesn't really touch on the metaphysical condition of mankind, where we're at. I feel like this novel is just kind of a big extended joke, black humor, all these things without really a point. So 7.1. But I do like the novel. I'm like I said, in terms of the Great American Novel, not really stretching toward it. So next we have Black Boy by Richard Wright. I like this one better than Native Son, especially for this categorization. This is one of the better coming-of-age novels of the 20th century. And when you think about its effect on Baldwin, Morrison, Ralph Ellison, all these people who we've already talked about, it was immense, because when this came out in 1945, kind of the black raw voice hadn't really made its debut into 20th century American literature yet. Like it had, but this was one of the first novels that really started to push that bar to the next level. It's also really interesting in context now, because this novel is kind of about language and about using words and education to, get out of this really negative situation. And, that's kind of what hip hop has been for the black community. And it's interesting because this book is rooted a lot in blues also, and blues's connection to language. Still, though, it falls short in a lot of the realms of ambition and creativity, style, scope, and so I'm going to rank it at a 7.4. I would give a similar ranking to Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. I feel like is one of these multi-generational epic novels. Okay, it's not multi-generational, but it moves. It feels like through Janie Crawford's 3 marriages in this novel, not really spoiling anything here, we kind of get this journey, this coming-of-age story that's dealing with like the Southern black oral tradition and like in that language, in that mood, in that feeling, but it is elevated to a much more cosmic level than what I could say like Black Boy was. And so because of that, and because of that Southern Gothic vibes and the feeling and all of that, I'm gonna throw this one at a 7.7, if not a little bit higher. We'll give it a 7.9 actually. Next up we have Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and this isn't very high. This is only high because there's a sector of people who use this to enable their hedonistic behavior. Guess what, guys? Acid is fun. I've taken it 100 times. Like, I've done a lot of psychedelics. I've smoked a lot of weed in my day, but glamorizing that, commodifying it, doing it in this manner, doing it in the most unconscious way possible, it's not really that cool. And the novel doesn't actually capture it all that well either. Like, I grew up in Las Vegas. Like, I understand. I've done acid hundreds of times in Las Vegas, sometimes on the strip. Like, I kind of get the vibe, and not really captured very well, not really that important other than for this archetypal modern American man. It's kind of like Charles Bukowski and their obsession with this image, this detachment. But, in terms of literary strength and many of these things, I think that, it's kind of like a cultural icon of a book, kind of this cult classic, but not really tapping into the great American novel. Like I was just talking about, Their Eyes Were Watching God and Black Boy. Like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is silly when compared to a lot of that. And if we're talking about novels dealing with psychedelics or the desert or altered states of consciousness, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas doesn't really hit the mark. But it's a good novel. It's a fun novel to read. I'm not sitting here and saying it's a bad novel, but 5.8. Speaking of the dirty South, we got Deliverance by James Dickey. So this is a weird novel for me because Dickey was actually a poet and he was like into this epic style of writing, which sometimes enters the novel. But when I feel like compared to Faulkner or McCarthy or even some of the other Southern Gothic authors that I've talked about, I don't really feel like this novel strikes exactly that same tone, but it is ambitious. It is dealing with American masculinity, one could say, American uncanniness, our primal instinct within, like having to kill and like go all the way and like bring something out of us. But I don't really feel like this novel carries it through all that well. It is a great American novel, but it isn't really tapping into a lot of these things that we've been talking about now for over 2 hours. I would recommend this if you like the movie, if you like the South, but I'm just thinking of some of these other Southern Gothic novels and what they've accomplished. And even though there's some really cool things that Dickey works through in this one, from what I remember, it's been 10 years since I read it, but when I read it, I wasn't that impressed. So 6.3. So earlier we talked about Tree of Smoke by Dennis Johnson. Speaking of another Vietnam novel, Dog Soldiers is also really good. I would place this one around a 7.3. This is kind of another one of these Apocalypse Now type novels. And this novel is about sending drugs, yes, drug dealing, sending heroin back to the United States from Vietnam, feeling like all this is useless. So why not just make this happen? Why not make some money from all this? So this is like an apocalyptic novel, a wild Vietnam story, a drug novel, a noir novel, all these things at once. And Robert Stone is a really awesome author. I liked Children of Light, A Flag for Sunrise in this one. He absolute awesome writer. So I don't feel like the ambition though is perfect. I feel like he really is like this evolution of Hemingway and could fit into that 1930s category. All those authors I talked about earlier, I feel like he maybe never stepped into himself the same way. But there you guys go, moving forward. Next, we have Seven Dreams by William T. Vollmann, which is a 7-part historical series detailing our basically contact and relationship with with indigenous people. I mean, it's wild. It extends into Canada, into the Caribbean, it obviously into the Americas. It's an awesome series. William T. Vollmann is one of the best living authors. Like I've been talking about throughout this entire presentation, he's releasing a million word novel on the CIA very soon, this March, if I remember correctly. And I feel like that could fit into this great American novel equation, but I'm making the video right now. And so I would rank this all the way up at an 8.7. This is, if you can handle the style, if you can handle the depth and you read all of these or even just one of these, you will have a very deep knowledge and understanding of what was really, I don't want to say what was really happening, but it really does sensationalize and bring to life our relationship with the natives and like what that actually feels like. I should say how the natives felt about us and all that interplay, all that insanity is really explored in these novels by Vollmann, and I am an absolute supporter of him and most of his work. And if you are into historical novels, if you are into like Indian and settler relations, like, you know, the Empire of the Summer Moon, stuff like that, this series is awesome, man. Like, I've only read 2 of them, but just blew my mind, and I can't wait to read the other 5. So next we have Shadow Country, and this is like almost like the updated Absalom. This is an awesome novel. I mean, this is a really long novel. This is an ambitious novel. Really good stuff though. If you enjoy William Faulkner, if you enjoyed Absalom, everything that I talked about with that, then this definitely needs to be on your list. As you guys can tell, I'm trying to keep the energy up. I'm trying to keep the analysis up, but I still have so many books to get through. But this novel knocked my socks off because it was easier to read than Faulkner, which is honestly a lot of the time a good thing, but really dealt with a lot of the same stuff. And so I'm going to give it an 8.6 on my list. Definitely has some problems, and that might affect my ranking of it as like a total novel, but really good, great American novel. So next we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, of course, by Mark Twain. This is one of those iconic great American novels. This is going to go at a 9.6 on my list. The scope, the dialect, the ambition, the compassion, the humor, Mark Twain has it all in this novel. The symbolism, it's all there. It has a morality to it. When we talk about a lot of these novels, they are like novels of the mind or novels of the city, the people. This is a novel that is a moral novel. every single author has debts to this. Like, this is like the moral Bible of American literature. If the Old Testament is Melville, the New Testament is Mark Twain and Huck Finn. And so that's why it gets such a 9697. That's why it gets such a high score for me. Moving on to a totally opposite novel. We have John Barth, the man, the myth, the legend, and the Saltweed Factor. And isn't it interesting, like, speaking of these 1930 authors born in the 1930s, the ones that went like deep into postmodernism, went deep into metafictions, as others like Roth and DeLillo and McCarthy dabbled in it but didn't go all the way, but others like Pynchon, and then Barth, I would say even more to the extreme, like decided like, I'm gonna do this. So I love this novel because it's a humorous novel. It's not this big epic. Well, it is a big epic, but it's not this novel that's really creating a new myth, but instead it really critiques how we make myths in the first place. It's kind of one of those novels, but it's absolutely genius in that sense. It's not slapsticky or a gag. And it's just, this is one of the progenitors of maximalism. This gave everyone permission, I would say, to be these kind of postmodernist maximalists a couple decades down the line. And Barth is the man for that. I'm going to throw this in at an 8.3. Really awesome novel. If you've never read John Barth, if you've never read some of his short stories, like his Lost in the Funhouse collection, and you want to understand postmodernist literature, then you definitely have to read him. Definitely study him. And he recently died too. I thought that was really sad. These authors from the 1930s are basically almost all gone now. Next, we have Henry Miller's The Tropic of Cancer. Shout out to Otto Rank hooking up, becoming Miller's psychoanalyst and Anise Nin's psychoanalysis and then taking her away from him. Love that story. But Tropic of Cancer is a wild novel. It's a novel about escaping from the puritanical American spirit. It's about escaping the guilt and the capitalist culture, the religious programming. But that's, at some level, the most American thing to do, right? To say, you know what, screw this, that's what I'm going to do. I have nothing in the world, but I'm still going to be happy. I'm still going to make this happen. And so even though this novel doesn't take place in America, it's this kind of American in exile, like The Sun Also Rises. I don't really think it speaks a lot to our spirit, though. I think it speaks a lot to our problem. So I'm going to throw it at a 7.7. So next we have Falconer by John Cheever. And man, this is a wild novel. I have this irrational fear. I don't know if any of you guys have this, like, I'm going to be in prison one day. I'm like, for what though? But I'm like, I don't know. It's just like, you're scared. Like, it's like, Jesus Christ, this sounds insane. But this novel is a prison novel. It's about a professor that gets sent to prison, and it's a thinking novel. It's about this like crazy journey through prison. And this novel just has a ton of clarity to it. Like, there's a redemption arc and like how that happens. It's not preachy. Like, it's a beautiful, the novel has a beautiful arc. Let me just tell you guys that. It's a really clear novel. It's really cool. It deals with the prison system and like the insanity of all that. And, that's a big part of American life, private prisons, all these different things. So 8.4 for Mr. Cheever. And so next we have Mr. William Gaddis, of course, and The Recognitions. And man, oh man, this is an epic novel. I mean, I would say that in terms of the comedic novels that we've talked about, and there have been how many so far? Dozens. I don't even know what novel number we're on. I'm at this point, heading into the land of delusion, and the only thing that's keeping me alive is that I've saved some of the novels that I really like for the end here to kind of carry me through. But this might be the top comedic novel that we've talked about. I mean, I don't know what I've really ranked higher. There's one that I think I'm about to rank higher right after this. But the prose in this novel is wild. Gaddis is a genius. There is Cormac McCarthy style dialogue without quotation marks. It's got a ton of references. This is like a lit bro Bible. There's jokes everywhere. It can be dense at times. It can have the voices can just be vastly different. This is one of the novels that I need to reread, that when I read it, it was just kind of like your jaw dropped, like, dude, this is a wild novel. The Recognitions is a very strong 9.0 3, in my opinion, which knocks it a bunch in front of some of those 9.0s from earlier. Absolute great novel. And if you don't know what this is about a painter who was the son of a Calvinist minister in New England, and he eventually sets out on his own. But he becomes a forger, right? He starts like making fake stuff, and it just turns into this entire commentary on on American society. It's a reflection on American culture, talking about the great American novel, that at the end, it's all just simulacra. It's all just derivative stealing. And that's the world we're in right now. Look, I'm making a video about the book. Like, it just kind of never ends. Then you're going to comment down below and react to me. And then I'm going to react to you. And someone will give a thumbs up. Someone will give a thumbs down. Someone will buy the book or not buy the book because of that. And the person that didn't buy it won't get this solved, or will get to avoid this. But the person who does buy it and read it is going to do this, or they're going to feel bad because it's on their shelf. And it's endless, you guys. So next we have Rabbit Run by John Updike, and this is a terrible book cover, everyone. This is as shitty of a AI random book cover that you'll ever get. You know, Updike in a lot of his stuff has a clean style, but I just don't really get the point of a lot of Updike stuff. It just kind of seems like this sentimental fuckboy energy that he brings to the table a lot of time, and it's kind of romanticized over and over again. So 5.7. Yeah, I said it. Because, well, there's people like Updike out here, just kind of annoying, like just a bunch of Joey Bag of Donuts. There's my favorite American writer of all, Tom Robbins, who will teach you in Still Life with Woodpecker what the moon means, what you can learn from a pack of Camel cigarettes, how you can find enlightenment through it, what the meaning of true love is, what it means to be an anarchist. If we're talking about comedic novels, Tom Robbins has the best comedic novels of anyone. Tom Robbins is an absolute master of not having to have tragedy, not having to have a bunch of random gags to make jokes about. He can write a clean, concise novel that is tragedy-free, that is a masterpiece time and time again. Still Life with Woodpecker is my favorite novel. It is one of the best great American novels out there. The influence isn't there. The mythic scope is there. 9.3, everyone. The video is now over. Leave a comment. Tell me what I got wrong. I am up. It's 2 a.m. I stayed online to make sure that we talked about all the novels that I have in my wheelhouse. There are others that I'm sure that you guys are going to list that I haven't read yet, but I sat and I made 20 different of these note cards just trying to think of what have I read. I looked through all my library, like, okay, what deserves to be on this list? What do I need to talk about? And so leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe. I would love to see you guys in the book club. Thank you guys for being here, and I will see you guys very soon in my next video, which is going to be the top 10 villains in literature. Be there for that, or be square.